the silence of stones. Tonight, we descend into the depths of time, into places where certainty dissolves and questions multiply like shadows at twilight. We stand before monuments that defy explanation, artifacts that challenge everything we thought we knew about our ancestors, mysteries so profound that even our most sophisticated science falls silent before them. These are not stories of aliens or fantasies. These are real places, real objects, real enigmas that exist in our world, waiting beneath desert sands, hidden in jungle depths, submerged beneath ancient seas. Allow your mind to drift now, to release its grip on the certainties of the modern world. Let the questions come, let the mysteries unfold. There is no urgency here, no need to solve what cannot be solved, only the quiet contemplation of wonders that have persisted through millennia, waiting for someone to truly see them. The archaeological record is full of certainties. We know when pottery styles changed in ancient Greece. We can trace the spread of bronze working across Europe. We understand the rise and fall of civilizations with reasonable confidence. But beneath this layer of knowledge, beneath the confident pronouncements of textbooks and museum placards, lies another archaeology. An archaeology of anomalies, of objects that appear where they shouldn't, of capabilities that seem impossible, of purposes we cannot fathom despite decades of study. These mysteries are not fringe theories or conspiracy fantasies. They are documented, photographed, measured, analysed by serious scholars who have spent careers trying to understand them. The mystery lies not in lack of evidence, but in abundance of it. Evidence that refuses to fit into neat categories, that suggests our ancestors possessed knowledge or abilities we have not credited them with, that hints at chapters of human history we have not yet learned to read. Consider what it means when science cannot explain something. Science is our most powerful tool for understanding reality, a method that has unlocked the atom, mapped the genome, sent probes to the edge of the solar system. When this formidable instrument encounters phenomena it cannot explain, when PhD archaeologists and engineers and physicists look at ancient sites and artifacts and must admit they do not understand how they were made or why they were created, this is significant. It suggests we are missing something fundamental about our past. Tonight, we will journey to 20 locations and phenomena that embody this mystery. Some are massive, stone monuments weighing hundreds of tons, moved and placed with precision we struggle to replicate today. Some are small, artifacts depicting technology that should not have existed, scripts no one can read, objects whose purpose remains utterly opaque. All of them share one quality. They challenge our understanding of what was possible in the ancient world. We will not offer easy answers. There are none. We will not spin tales of ancient aliens or lost super-civilizations, though such theories arise precisely because these mysteries are so difficult to explain conventionally. We will simply describe what exists, what has been found, what remains unexplained despite decades or centuries of study. The mystery itself is sufficient. It needs no embellishment, no fantasy. Reality, as we shall see, is strange enough. As you lie here in the darkness, allow yourself to become an ancient human, standing before these monuments when they were new, understanding their purpose with the knowledge we have lost, or become the archaeologist, brushing centuries of dirt away to reveal something that should not exist, that contradicts everything you were taught about the capabilities of ancient peoples. Or simply remain yourself, a modern human contemplating the vast stretches of time that separate us from these mysterious works, wondering what knowledge has been lost in that abyss of years. The sites we will visit span the globe. From the Mediterranean to the Pacific, from the Andes to the Sahara, humanity has left mysterious marks on the landscape. These are not concentrated in one location or culture. They appear everywhere, suggesting that the capacity for creating the inexplicable is not limited to any single group, but is somehow fundamental to the human experience across cultures and millennia. Some of these mysteries involve engineering that seems beyond ancient capabilities, stones weighing as much as modern jetliners, moved over impossible terrain and fitted together with tolerances tighter than a human hair. Precision drilling in the hardest stones using tools that supposedly didn't exist. Astronomical alignments accurate to fractions of a degree, requiring knowledge we assume they didn't possess. Others involve knowledge we cannot trace. How did ancient cultures develop deep understanding of astronomy without telescopes? How did they create maps showing coastlines not seen for thousands of years? How did they depict things, animals, technologies, concepts they should never have encountered? These questions of knowledge rather than engineering are perhaps even more mysterious, because they suggest not just physical capability, but information transmitted across impossible distances or times. Still, others involve purposes we cannot fathom. Massive earthworks visible only from altitudes they could never reach. Artifacts whose function remains opaque despite analysis by experts. Structures that align to astronomical events with no apparent practical purpose. The ancient world is full of effort invested in projects whose reason for existence we simply do not understand. As your breathing slows and deepens, as the familiar world of your day recedes, prepare to enter a different mental space. One where certainty gives way to wonder, where the confident narratives of human history reveal their gaps and uncertainties, where the achievements of our ancestors appear both more impressive and more mysterious than we usually acknowledge. This journey will take hours. There is no hurry. We have all the time in the world to contemplate these enigmas, to examine them from every angle, to understand what makes them so resistant to explanation. Some of the mysteries we'll encounter have been known for centuries, others have been discovered only recently, all remain unsolved despite the best efforts of brilliant minds. Let the mystery wash over you like a wave. Let it dissolve the rigid categories of possible and impossible that modern education instills. Our ancestors were not simple. They were humans like us, intelligent, curious, capable. What they achieved should not surprise us, and yet it does, because we have underestimated them, because we have assumed that technological progress is linear and that ancient peoples lacked capabilities we possess. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not any single artifact or site, but the question of human potential itself. What are humans capable of when necessity demands it? What knowledge can be developed without modern instruments through careful observation over generations? What can be achieved through organization, will, and accumulated wisdom? These questions underlie all the specific mysteries we'll examine. The stones are silent, but they speak nonetheless. They tell us we do not know our own history as well as we think. They whisper that the ancient world held wonders we have not yet appreciated. They suggest that human achievement cannot be measured only by written records and modern technology, that there are forms of knowledge and capability that leave different traces we're only beginning to learn how to read. So settle in, breathe deeply, let your mind open to mystery, to questions without answers, to the profound uncertainty that underlies our confident narratives about the past. We are going on a journey to the edges of archaeological knowledge, to the places where science falls silent and wonder begins. These hours ahead will change how you see the ancient world, will reveal depths and complexities in our shared human past that textbooks rarely acknowledge. The mysteries await. They have waited for thousands of years. They will wait thousands more. But tonight, for these hours, they are yours to contemplate, to wonder at, to hold in your imagination as you drift towards sleep. The ancient world opens before us, vast and strange and full of wonders we do not understand. Let us begin. The impossible stones of Baalbek. In the mountains of Lebanon, in a place humans have considered sacred for at least 5,000 years, lie stones that should not exist. The Roman temple complex at Baalbek is impressive enough. Massive columns, elaborate carvings, a testament to imperial power and engineering skill. But beneath the Roman work, incorporated into the foundation of the Temple of Jupiter, are stones that dwarf anything the Romans built. Stones so massive that even describing their weight seems like exaggeration. Stones that modern engineering would struggle to move and place. These are the trilithon, 3 limestone blocks, each weighing approximately 800 tons. 800 tons. To put this in perspective, that's roughly the weight of 3 fully loaded 747 jumbo jets. Each block measures about 19 meters long, 4.2 meters high, and 3.6 meters deep. They were quarried from a limestone outcrop about a quarter mile from the temple complex, cut from the living rock with bronze tools and wooden wedges, supposedly, then transported uphill and placed with such precision that you cannot slip a knife blade between them. They sit approximately 20 feet above ground level, incorporated into a wall as if they were ordinary building blocks. No one knows who placed these stones or when. The Romans built on top of them but did not move them. Roman engineering, impressive as it was, did not work with stones of this scale. The blocks were already in place when the Romans arrived. They attributed the work to earlier peoples, perhaps the Phoenicians, but offered no explanation for how it was accomplished. The Phoenicians themselves left no record of this work, no description of the techniques used, no boasting about the achievement. In the quarry where the stones were cut, another mystery waits. The stone of the pregnant woman, a partially quarried block even larger than the trilithon stones, weighing perhaps 1,000 tons. It lies at an angle in the bedrock, partially freed but never completely removed and never transported. Why was work abandoned? What changed that made this enormous effort pointless? The stone offers no answers, lying silent in its ancient quarry, a monument to ambition or futility. And recently, even more impossibility was discovered. Beneath the stone of the pregnant woman, archaeologists found another megalith, even larger, perhaps 650 tons, potentially the largest worked stone block in the world. It too was never finished, never moved. The quarry at Baalbek is a graveyard of giants, of stones that pushed the boundaries of human capability and perhaps exceeded them. The questions multiply the more you examine them. How were these stones cut? Bronze and copper tools can quarry limestone, but the effort required is enormous, the time investment extraordinary. For blocks of this size, teams of workers would have needed months or years of sustained effort just to free the stones from the bedrock. Why invest this effort? What was being built that required such massive blocks? How were they moved? 800 tons cannot be lifted by human muscle alone, no matter how many workers you employ. Wooden rollers would splinter, sledges would sink into soil, the stones would need to be moved uphill, over a quarter mile of rough terrain. Modern cranes can lift 800 tons, but they are specialised equipment, massive machines that must be assembled on site. Ancient peoples had none of this technology, supposedly. Some have proposed that water power was used, that the stones were floated on canals or channels, but the terrain at Baalbek is wrong for this. Others suggest massive earthen ramps, but no traces of such ramps exist, and the engineering required would be nearly as impressive as moving the stones themselves. Still others propose that the stones were moved incrementally, rocked back and forth with levers and rollers over months or years. Possible, perhaps, but requiring organisation and sustained effort that seems unlikely for projects whose purpose we don't understand. How were they placed? The stones sit 20 feet above ground level, fitted together precisely. Getting them to that height would require either a ramp, again no evidence, or some kind of lifting mechanism. And the precision of fit suggests they were lowered carefully into place, adjusted, positioned exactly. The engineering problem is not just moving the stones but controlling them, placing them with accuracy despite their enormous mass. And perhaps most mysteriously, why? What was being built that required stones of this size? Structural engineering principles suggest that using many smaller stones would be easier and would produce an equally strong foundation. Large stones are impressive, but they're not necessary. The Romans understood this. Their engineering used smaller, more manageable blocks to create structures that still stand today. Why would an earlier culture choose to work with stones so massive that they push the absolute limits of human capability? Imagine standing at Baalbek in the distant past, perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. You are part of a society that has decided to build something unprecedented. The quarrying has taken years. Hundreds or thousands of workers have chipped away at solid limestone, slowly freeing blocks of stone larger than anything previously moved by humans. The blocks are ready. Now comes the truly impossible part, moving them. What technique do you use? What knowledge do you possess that makes this achievable? What organisation enables you to coordinate the effort of hundreds or thousands of people over the months or years required? What motivates this extraordinary investment of labour? Religious devotion? Royal command? Some purpose we cannot imagine. You watch as the first massive block begins to move, somehow, impossibly. It travels slowly across the landscape, a mountain of stone moving where no mountain should move. It reaches the building site. It is lifted somehow, impossibly, to the height where it will rest. It is positioned, adjusted with minute precision, despite weighing as much as hundreds of elephants. And then it is done, and you begin again with the second block and then the third. The Romans, who came later, looked at these stones and knew they had not placed them. They built their temple atop this earlier work, incorporating it into their foundation but making no attempt to replicate it. They had conquered most of the known world, had built roads and aqueducts and colosseums, but they could not, or did not, move stones like these. They worked around them, accepted them as the work of earlier peoples whose capabilities they could not match. Modern engineers look at these stones with similar humility. Yes, with modern equipment, we could move them, but it would require specialized heavy lift cranes, careful planning, significant expense. It would not be easy, and we have technology the ancients lacked. Steel cables, diesel engines, computer-controlled systems. What did they have? What have we lost or never learned about? The academic consensus is that the stones were moved using simple machines. Levers, rollers, ramps, pulleys, combined with massive investment of human labour and clever techniques we haven't fully reconstructed. This is probably true. Humans are resourceful. When motivated, we achieve things that seem impossible. The stones at Baalbek testify to human capability, not to supernatural or extraterrestrial intervention. But acknowledging that humans moved these stones doesn't eliminate the mystery. It deepens it. Because it means that ancient peoples working with tools we consider primitive accomplished something that even with modern equipment would be a major engineering challenge. It means they possessed knowledge or techniques or organizational capabilities that we haven't fully appreciated. It means the ancient world was more sophisticated, more capable than we usually credit it with being. The stones at Baalbek are not alone. Around the world, other megalithic sites raise similar questions. Stonehenge, Easter Island, Ollantay Tambo, dozens of others. Everywhere, ancient peoples moved and placed stones that challenge our understanding of what was possible with ancient technology. Baalbek is simply the most extreme example. The place where the stones are so massive that the engineering problem becomes undeniable. As you lie here, picture those stones as they are today, visited by tourists who stand before them and struggle to comprehend the scale. Picture them as they were thousands of years ago, newly placed, part of some temple or structure whose full form we can only guess at. Picture them in that moment of movement, when human will and ingenuity overcame the stone's mass and made the impossible actual. The mystery remains. We can propose theories, test hypotheses, conduct experiments. But standing before those stones, watching them sit unmoved and unmovable as they have for thousands of years, the mystery persists. How? Why? What knowledge has been lost? What were they building? The stones offer no answers, only their mute testimony to human achievement we cannot fully explain. The silence of Baalbek is profound. It speaks of capabilities we've underestimated, of techniques we've lost, of purposes we don't understand. It reminds us that the ancient world holds secrets we have not yet uncovered, that beneath the confident narratives of human history lie chapters we cannot yet read, written in stone too massive to ignore but too enigmatic to understand. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient computer. In 1901, Greek sponge divers working off the coast of Antikythera, a small island between Crete and mainland Greece, discovered a shipwreck. The ship had sunk around 70-60 BCE, carrying a cargo of marble and bronze statues, pottery and other luxury goods. Among the artifacts recovered was a corroded lump of bronze and wood that initially drew little attention. It was catalogued, placed in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and forgotten. Months later, an archaeologist named Valerios Stais noticed that the lump had split, revealing something extraordinary inside. A complex arrangement of bronze gears, like the workings of a sophisticated clock. But this object was over 2,000 years old, dating from an era when the most complex mechanisms were supposed to be simple water wheels and basic presses. Nothing like this was supposed to exist in the ancient world. For decades, scholars struggled to understand the Antikythera mechanism. X-rays revealed layer upon layer of interlocking gears, at least 30 of them, fitted together with remarkable precision. But the heavy corrosion and fragmentary state of the device made it nearly impossible to understand how these gears had functioned, or what purpose they served. Various theories were proposed: navigation instrument, astronomical calculator, glorified astrolabe. None fully explained the complexity. It wasn't until the 21st century with advanced imaging technology that the mechanism's true nature began to emerge. Using high-resolution X-ray computed tomography and other techniques, researchers could finally see through the corrosion to the gears beneath. What they found was astonishing, a device of such sophistication that it wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. The Antikythera mechanism is an analog computer designed to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance. It modelled the motions of the Sun, Moon, and planets using a complex system of differential gears, a technology not seen again until medieval European clocks. It calculated the Moon's elliptical orbit, compensating for its varying speed, a level of astronomical knowledge that wasn't codified in surviving texts. It predicted solar and lunar eclipses, accounting for the Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern known to ancient astronomers, but never before seen embodied in mechanical form. The precision of the gears is remarkable. Some have teeth less than 1 millimeter long. The entire mechanism, which fit into a wooden case about the size of a shoebox, contained the equivalent of knowledge that would fill textbooks. To operate it, you turned a crank on the side, and pointers on the face displayed the positions of celestial bodies on any given date. There were dials for the Egyptian calendar, the Greek zodiac, the Olympic Games cycle, eclipse predictions, and more. Researchers have identified inscriptions on the device, an instruction manual of sorts, explaining how to interpret the dials and what various features indicated. The text refers to colours associated with eclipses, to the planets including Venus and Saturn, to calendrical systems. This was not a simple device or a toy. It was a serious scientific instrument, embodying knowledge at the cutting edge of ancient astronomy. But here's the deepest mystery. The Antikythera mechanism should not exist. There is no mention in any surviving ancient text of anything like it. No other mechanism of comparable complexity is known until medieval European clocks over 1,000 years later. The technology appears suddenly, fully formed, with no apparent developmental history and no successor devices. It's as if someone dropped an iPhone in the Middle Ages. A technology completely out of place in its time. Where did this technology come from? The mechanism's sophistication suggests a long tradition of such devices, with craftsmen refining techniques over generations. But if such a tradition existed, where is the evidence? Where are the simpler predecessors, the cruder prototypes, the workshops where these mechanisms were made? Where are the literary references to these devices, the instruction manuals, the scientific treatises describing their construction? Some scholars have proposed that the tradition centred on Rhodes, where several technical schools existed in the ancient world. The ship that sank near Antikythera may have been carrying the device from Rhodes to Rome. But Rhodes, like everywhere else in the ancient Mediterranean, has yielded no other examples of such mechanisms. If there were more, and there almost certainly were, they have not survived. This raises uncomfortable questions about what else has been lost. How many other technological achievements of the ancient world have disappeared without trace? How sophisticated were ancient sciences that left no written record or whose records have been destroyed? The Antikythera mechanism survived only by accident, preserved in the anoxic environment of a shipwreck. How many similar devices corroded away in soil or were melted down for their metal? The mechanism suggests that ancient technology was far more advanced, at least in some areas, than we typically imagine. We think of ancient peoples as lacking in technical sophistication compared to modern humans. But here is proof that they could create precision mechanisms embodying complex scientific knowledge, that they could miniaturize and integrate multiple functions into compact devices, that they possessed skills in metalworking and engineering that we have not credited them with. Imagine the craftsman who made this device. He, almost certainly he given ancient gender roles, possessed extraordinary skills. He could cut bronze gears with teeth less than 1 millimeter wide. He understood complex astronomical cycles and how to model them mechanically. He could read and write, incorporating inscriptions into the device. He worked in a tradition sophisticated enough to have developed differential gearing, a technology we usually associate with much later periods. This craftsman was not alone. Creating a device this complex would have required collaboration. Astronomers to provide the knowledge, metallurgists to prepare the bronze, engineers to design the gear trains, craftsmen to execute the work. This implies a society capable of supporting specialized technical professions, of accumulating and transmitting specialized knowledge, of investing resources in creating tools that served intellectual rather than immediate practical purposes. The device was expensive. The bronze alone represented significant value, and the hours of skilled labor required to create it would have made it affordable only to the wealthy or to institutions like temples or libraries. Someone, perhaps a rich patron, perhaps a scholarly institution, valued astronomical prediction enough to commission this costly device. They saw value in knowing the positions of celestial bodies, in predicting eclipses, in modelling cosmic motions. Why? Practical navigation didn't require this level of precision. Agricultural calendars could be maintained with simpler methods. Perhaps the value was philosophical or religious, understanding the heavens as a way of understanding divine order. Perhaps it was political, a ruler demonstrating his sophistication and learning by possessing such an instrument. Perhaps it was purely intellectual, the joy of understanding for its own sake, the human desire to model and predict the cosmos. Modern reconstructions of the Antikythera mechanism have been built. Following the ancient design, they work. You turn the crank and the gears mesh, and the pointers move across the dial, showing where the moon will be in 6 months, when the next eclipse will occur, what phase the moon will show on your birthday 5 years hence. It's remarkable to watch, even in replica. The ancient original before corrosion must have been beautiful. Bronze gears glinting in lamplight, inscriptions carefully incised, the whole mechanism a testament to human ingenuity. The mechanism tells us that ancient science was more sophisticated than we knew. It tells us that technologies can be lost, that civilizations can decline and lose capabilities they once possessed. It tells us that we should be humble about our assumptions regarding what ancient peoples could or could not do. Most of all, it tells us that there is much about the ancient world we do not know, that the archaeological record is fragmentary, that extraordinary things may have existed and left no trace. As you rest here, picture that device as it was when new, before corrosion obscured its gears, before the sea claimed it. Picture the craftsman's hands shaping each gear, testing each mesh, ensuring that the mechanism accurately modelled the cosmos. Picture the scholar who first used it, turning the crank, consulting the dials, feeling that connection between human-made mechanism and celestial motions, between bronze gears and the vast machinery of the heavens. The Antikythera mechanism is unique, the only one of its kind, a glimpse of ancient technology we would never have known existed if chance hadn't preserved it. What else was lost? What other capabilities did ancient peoples possess that left no trace? The questions multiply, but answers remain scarce. The mechanism sits in its museum case, offering mute testimony to ancient sophistication, to knowledge lost and slowly regained, to the humility we should feel when pronouncing what was or wasn't possible in ages before our own. The unfinished obelisk, scars in the bedrock. In the granite quarries of Aswan, in southern Egypt, lies a monument to failure or perhaps to ambition that exceeded capability. The unfinished obelisk rests where ancient workers abandoned it, still attached to the bedrock from which they were attempting to free it. If completed, it would have been the largest obelisk ever erected, nearly 42 meters tall and weighing approximately 1,200 tons. But it was never finished. Cracks appeared in the granite and the project was abandoned, leaving behind a mystery that has puzzled archaeologists and engineers for decades. The mystery is not why the project failed. Cracks in the stone are sufficient explanation. The mystery is how the ancient Egyptians intended to succeed. How were they planning to free this enormous mass of granite from the bedrock? How would they move it? How would they transport it hundreds of miles down the Nile? How would they raise it and place it upright? The tools and techniques that would be required seem beyond what we credit the ancient Egyptians with possessing. The obelisk lies in a trench cut into solid granite, one of the hardest stones known. The workers cut this trench by hand, chipping away at the granite with tools that were supposedly made of copper or bronze alloyed with small amounts of other metals. Copper is soft. It can be shaped easily, which makes it useful for tools, but it's also easily worn down. Using copper tools to quarry granite should be impractical, requiring constant sharpening or replacement of the tools, making absurdly slow progress. Yet the trench exists. It's real. You can walk down into it today, run your hands along the marks left by ancient tools, see the scars in the bedrock where they chipped and pounded. The evidence of work is undeniable. Somehow ancient workers cut this trench, freeing 3 sides of the enormous obelisk from the surrounding bedrock. Only the bottom remained attached when cracks appeared and work stopped. Along the sides of the obelisk and in the trench, archaeologists have found mysterious oval depressions, thousands of them, each about the size of a fist, each cut into the granite with remarkable consistency. These depressions cover the surface of the obelisk and the walls of the trench. What are they? The conventional explanation is that they're the marks left by workers using dolerite pounders, balls of dense stone used to hammer and chip at the granite. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. Dolerite is indeed harder than granite and could theoretically chip it away. But the effort required would be enormous. Each of those thousands of depressions represents hours of sustained pounding. The total labour would be extraordinary, years of work by hundreds of workers, all pounding at solid granite with stone balls making progress measured in millimetres per day. Why would the Egyptians use such an inefficient method? If they had better tools or techniques available, why choose the most laborious approach? And if this was truly the best method available, how did they complete the many other obelisks that dot Egypt and now museums around the world? The unfinished obelisk is larger than most, but dozens of other obelisks were successfully quarried, transported and erected. All would have required similar techniques. The total labour investment across all these projects is almost incomprehensible. Some researchers have proposed alternative explanations. Perhaps the oval depressions aren't tool marks at all, but are instead evidence of a different technique. Maybe heating the granite with fire and then rapidly cooling it with water, causing the stone to crack and flake. But experiments with this technique have produced inconsistent results and leave marks different from those seen at Aswan. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians had knowledge of chemical processes that could soften or weaken granite, making it easier to cut. But no evidence of such chemicals has been found, and no ancient text describes such techniques. The unfinished state of the obelisk paradoxically makes it more mysterious than completed obelisks. When we see a standing obelisk, we can admire it without fully contemplating the process of its creation. But here, frozen mid-creation, we confront that process directly. We see the immense labour involved, the scale of the ambition, the challenge of the task, and we must ask, how did they intend to finish this? What was the next step? Assuming the workers had successfully freed the obelisk from the bedrock, a task that would have required cutting beneath it somehow, perhaps by tunnelling or by cutting slots and using wooden wedges to split the stone. How would they move it? 1,200 tons cannot be lifted by human muscle. Wooden rollers would be crushed. The stone would need to be transported several miles to the Nile, over terrain that was not flat or smooth. Perhaps they would have moved it incrementally, inching it forward on sledges, using massive teams of workers pulling on ropes. Experiments have shown that large groups of people can move surprising weights this way. But 200 tons tests the limits of what's possible, and the organisation required, coordinating hundreds or thousands of workers, maintaining discipline and synchronisation, preventing accidents that would be fatal when handling such enormous weights. This is social and logistical engineering as impressive as the physical engineering. Once at the Nile, the obelisk would need to be loaded onto a barge. Again, the engineering problems multiply. The barge would need to be enormous, capable of carrying 200 tons without sinking. It would need to be stable enough that the weight of the obelisk wouldn't capsize it. Loading the obelisk onto the barge without cracking it would require precision and control. Then the barge would need to travel hundreds of miles downriver to Cairo or Luxor, navigating the Nile without running aground or capsizing. Finally, at the destination, the obelisk would need to be unloaded, transported to the temple or site where it would stand, and then erected. Raising an obelisk is an engineering feat in itself. The stone must be lifted from horizontal to vertical, controlled throughout the process, and lowered precisely into place. Modern engineers have studied this problem extensively. Various methods are possible, but all require substantial infrastructure, ramps, pivot points, counterweights, or other mechanical advantages. The ancient Egyptians left no detailed descriptions of these processes. We have some images on tomb walls showing the transport of large statues, with hundreds of workers pulling on ropes. We have references in text to the dedication of obelisks, to the glory of pharaohs who erected them. But we don't have engineering manuals, step-by-step instructions, detailed accounts of techniques. This knowledge was held by specialists passed down through apprenticeship, perhaps considered secret or sacred, so we are left with the evidence itself, the unfinished obelisk in its quarry, the standing obelisks scattered across Egypt and beyond, the tools found at quarry sites. From this evidence, we must reconstruct processes that are not fully understood. We can propose techniques, test them experimentally, demonstrate that certain approaches would have worked, but we cannot be certain that our reconstructions match what the ancient Egyptians actually did. The true techniques may have been different, perhaps more ingenious or more efficient than what we've imagined. As you lie here, imagine standing in that quarry thousands of years ago. The sun beats down. Aswan is one of the hottest places in Egypt. Around you, hundreds of workers pound at the granite with their dolerite stones, the sound of stone on stone echoing across the quarry. Progress is slow but steady. The trench deepens incrementally, day by day, month by month. The obelisk gradually emerges from the bedrock, still part of the earth, but being separated from it through sheer sustained effort. Then someone notices the crack, a flaw in the stone, invisible until now. Revealed by the stresses of quarrying, the crack spreads. The project is doomed. All that work, all those months or years of effort wasted. The obelisk will never stand. The workers stop. The tools are set down. The site is abandoned, and the unfinished obelisk remains, a testament to ambition that failed but also to capability that still astounds. The mystery of ancient Egyptian stoneworking persists. We can describe what they did: quarry enormous stones, transport them great distances, erect them with precision. We can even propose how they did it, with simple tools, massive labour, clever techniques. But the gap between describing and truly understanding remains. Standing in that quarry, looking at those tool marks, contemplating the sheer scale of the ambition, the mystery deepens rather than resolves. How did they intend to succeed? What gave them the confidence to attempt the seemingly impossible? What knowledge have we lost about working with stone, about organising massive labour projects, about human capability when directed toward monumental goals? The unfinished obelisk offers no answers, only its silent presence, its scars bearing witness to efforts we cannot fully comprehend, to capabilities we have not fully credited, to mysteries that persist despite all our modern understanding. Göbekli Tepe, the temple before civilization. In southeastern Turkey, on a hilltop that overlooks the Harran Plain, lies a discovery that has upended our understanding of human history. Göbekli Tepe, excavated beginning in the 1990s, dates to approximately 9600 BCE, over 11,000 years ago, at the dawn of agriculture, before pottery, before writing, before cities. According to everything we thought we knew about human cultural evolution, complex religious architecture requiring organised labour should not exist at this point in history. But it does. The site consists of multiple circular enclosures, each defined by massive T-shaped limestone pillars. These pillars are not simple standing stones. They are carefully shaped, some weighing up to 20 tons, carved with reliefs of animals including foxes, wild boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, and other creatures. The largest pillars stand over 5 meters tall. They are arranged in circles, with 2 larger pillars at the centre and smaller ones forming the ring. This pattern repeats across multiple structures at the site. The mystery begins with the date. Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It's older than the Egyptian pyramids by more than 6,000 years. It predates the earliest cities in Mesopotamia. It was built by people who were supposedly hunter-gatherers, who should not have had the social organisation, the sustained food surplus, or the cultural sophistication to undertake such a massive building project. The conventional narrative of human cultural evolution goes something like this. Humans were hunter-gatherers for most of their history. Then, about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, they began to cultivate plants and domesticate animals. Agriculture created food surpluses, which allowed for denser populations and specialised roles. This led to the development of villages, then towns, then cities. With cities came organised religion, monumental architecture, writing, and other features of civilization. Göbekli Tepe reverses this sequence. Here is monumental religious architecture before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before any of the supposed prerequisites for such construction. The implications are profound. Either our timeline is wrong, or our understanding of what hunter-gatherers were capable of is dramatically incomplete. or Göbekli Tepe was built by a society more complex than we've recognized for this period. The effort required to build Göbekli Tepe was substantial. The limestone pillars were quarried from bedrock about a quarter-mile from the hilltop. Each pillar weighing many tons had to be freed from the stone, transported uphill, shaped, carved with the elaborate animal reliefs, and erected in precise positions. The circular enclosures required planning and design. The entire complex represents thousands of hours of coordinated labor. Who organized this effort? Hunter-gatherer societies are typically small mobile groups. They don't have hierarchical authority structures that can command large workforces. They don't typically engage in projects requiring years of sustained effort. Yet here is evidence of exactly that kind of project, dated to a period when such organizations supposedly didn't exist. One possibility is that our understanding of this period is incomplete. Perhaps these hunter-gatherers were more settled than we've assumed, perhaps living in permanent or semi-permanent camps even before developing full agriculture. Perhaps they had more complex social structures, with leaders who could organize communal projects. Perhaps the abundance of game and wild plants in this region allowed for denser populations and more leisure time than typical hunter-gatherer groups. Another possibility is that Göbekli Tepe itself played a role in the development of agriculture. Perhaps the need to feed workers building the temple complex created pressure to develop more reliable food sources. Perhaps the gatherings at Göbekli Tepe brought together people from wide areas, facilitating the exchange of knowledge about useful plants and animals. Perhaps the transition to agriculture wasn't a simple cause and effect relationship with civilization, but a more complex interplay between cultural developments. The carvings on the pillars add another layer of mystery. The animal reliefs are sophisticated, showing detailed knowledge of anatomy and behavior. Foxes, wild boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, leopards, gazelles. Dozens of species are represented. Some appear threatening, others not. Some interpretations suggest they represent constellations, that Göbekli Tepe was an astronomical observatory. Others see shamanic symbolism, representations of spirit animals or totemic creatures. Still others suggest the animals represent different clans or groups who participated in building and using the site. The pillars themselves are anthropomorphic. Though abstract, they clearly represent human figures. The T-shapes suggest head and shoulders, and some have arms carved in low relief at their sides. Some have belt-like features carved around their middles with what might be loincloths or ritual garments. These aren't just posts or markers, they're stylized human figures, perhaps representing ancestors, gods, or idealized humans. What rituals took place here? The excavators have found remains of feasting, bones from wild game, evidence of food preparation. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage site where groups gathered periodically for religious ceremonies and communal meals. Perhaps it was a site for initiation rituals, where young people were brought to learn sacred knowledge. Perhaps it was an observatory, where specialists studied the sky and marked important celestial events. The circular structures with their central pillars suggest gatherings, with people arranged around the perimeter facing inward. But here is perhaps the deepest mystery. After centuries or millennia of use, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. The enclosures were filled with rubble and soil, the pillars covered, the site abandoned. This was not gradual abandonment or natural accumulation. It was deliberate, intentional burial. Someone decided that Göbekli Tepe should be hidden, preserved perhaps, but removed from use. Why? What changed that made this sacred site obsolete or forbidden? Had beliefs shifted, making the old site irrelevant or even dangerous? Had the society that built it transformed so much that maintaining the site was no longer possible or desirable? Or was the burial itself a ritual act, a closing ceremony marking the end of an era? The deliberate burial is actually why Göbekli Tepe survived. A site left exposed on a hilltop would have been weathered, damaged, stone-robbed for later buildings. But buried, protected by the rubble fill that covered it, the site remained largely intact for 11,000 years until modern excavation revealed it. The decision to bury the site, whatever its original motivation, preserved it for future discovery. Only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar suggests many more structures remain buried. What has been revealed so far represents decades of careful archaeological work, and full excavation may take a century or more. Each new season of excavation reveals more details, more complexity, more reasons to question our assumptions about this period in human history. As you rest here, breathing slowly, let your mind drift back to that hilltop 11,000 years ago. The structures are new, the limestone pillars gleaming in the sun, not yet weathered by millennia. People gather. From how far away? How do they know to come? What calls them to this place? They arrive in groups, perhaps families or clans, bringing whatever food they can contribute to the communal feast. They arrange themselves in the circular enclosures, perhaps each group having its traditional place. The central pillars dominate the space, the carved animals seeming to watch, the abstract human forms suggesting presence. What prayers are spoken? What songs sung? What knowledge is shared or secrets revealed? Some scholars see Göbekli Tepe as evidence of a lost civilization, a sophisticated culture that existed before the dawn of recorded history and was forgotten. Others see it as an anomaly, an exceptional achievement by people who were still primarily hunter-gatherers, but who possessed capabilities we haven't fully appreciated. Still others see it as the first spark of civilization itself, the moment when humans transitioned from simple survival to creating monuments that served cultural and spiritual, rather than purely practical purposes. Whatever interpretation you prefer, Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that our ancestors were capable of more than we've credited them with. They could organize large projects, they could plan and execute complex constructions, they could create sophisticated symbolic art, they could sustain efforts over long periods, and they could do all of this before agriculture, before cities, before any of the features we usually associate with advanced societies. The mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not that it exists. We have the physical evidence right there, undeniable. The mystery is what it means, what it tells us about this period in human history, how it fits into or contradicts our narratives about human cultural evolution. The mystery is in the gap between what we thought possible and what clearly was possible, between our assumptions and the reality that ancient peoples created. The pillars stand, even if now only in excavated pits rather than open air. The carvings persist, animals frozen in stone. The mystery endures, resistant to easy explanation, challenging us to reconsider what we know about human history, about the capabilities of ancient peoples, about the path that led from small bands of hunter-gatherers to the complex civilizations that would follow thousands of years later. Göbekli Tepe forces humility. It reminds us that there is much we don't know about the ancient world, that the archaeological record is incomplete, that our narratives about human history are based on limited evidence and may need revision as new discoveries emerge. Most importantly, it suggests that ancient peoples were not simple or primitive, but were humans like us, intelligent, creative, capable of achievements that still impress us more than 10,000 years later. The Nazca Lines, art for the gods. On the arid plains of southern Peru, spread across nearly 200 square miles of desert, are lines. Thousands of lines, some straight as an arrow running for miles, others forming geometric shapes, triangles, trapezoids, spirals, and interspersed among the geometric forms are figures, animals, plants, humanoid shapes, some spanning hundreds of feet. These are the Nazca Lines, created between 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture, and they present a mystery that remains unsolved despite decades of study. The mystery is not how they were made. The technique is well understood. The desert surface here is covered with reddish pebbles containing iron oxide. Beneath is lighter-coloured soil. By removing the surface pebbles, you reveal the lighter soil underneath, creating a line. It's remarkably simple. Small teams of workers could create even the longest lines using just ropes and stakes for maintaining straight paths. Time and effort were required, but not technology beyond what the Nazca possessed. The mystery is why. Why invest enormous effort in creating lines and figures so large they can only be properly seen from the air? The Nazca had no aircraft, no balloons, no way to ascend to the heights necessary to appreciate these figures as wholes. Standing on the ground, you see only a cleared path, stones moved aside. You cannot perceive the pattern, cannot recognize the spider or monkey or bird that the lines form. Only from hundreds of feet up does the image emerge. The figures are extraordinary in their execution. The spider is a perfect representation, accurate in its proportions and details. The monkey has a curled tail, each finger and toe distinct. The hummingbird's long beak extends perfectly straight for over 300 feet. These aren't crude sketches, but carefully planned designs executed with precision across vast scales. Creating them would have required detailed planning, careful measurement, and sustained effort to ensure the proportions remained correct despite the enormous size. How did the Nazca plan these figures? Some researchers have proposed that they use small-scale models, then scaled them up using a grid system. Evidence of smaller versions of some figures has been found on hillsides, where they could be seen from below. Perhaps these were the templates. Workers could then recreate the design at larger scale on the flat desert, using ropes and stakes to maintain proportions and alignment. But even if we understand the technique, the motivation remains unclear. Various theories have been proposed. One early theory suggested they were astronomical markers, lines pointing to sunrise or sunset positions on solstical or equinoctial dates. Some alignments do correspond to astronomical events, but most don't. The astronomical explanation doesn't account for the animal figures or the many lines that point to nothing celestial. Another theory proposes they were processional paths, routes for ritual walking. The lines would be followed on foot as part of religious ceremonies, perhaps pilgrimages to sacred sites, or ritual movements meant to invoke gods or ensure good harvests. This explains why straight lines extend for miles. They're paths, not markers. But it doesn't fully explain the figures, which aren't practical for walking and whose designs aren't visible from ground level. A third theory connects the lines to water. The Nazca region is extremely arid, and water was precious. Some lines point towards sources of underground water or toward areas where water flows seasonally. Perhaps the lines were water rituals, sympathetic magic meant to invoke rain, or markers guiding people to water sources. The figure of the spider might be significant here. One species of spider in the region creates burrows near water sources, and depicting it might be a prayer or invocation for water. Yet another theory suggests the lines were meant to be seen by the gods. The Nazca worldview apparently included mountain spirits and sky gods. Creating enormous figures on the ground might have been a way of communicating with these deities, of offering art or messages that could be seen from the heavens. The figures would be prayers or offerings, created not for human viewing but for divine appreciation. There's likely truth in multiple theories. The lines and figures probably served multiple purposes: astronomical, ritual, religious, and practical. Ancient cultures rarely create things for single purposes. A cathedral is a church, but it's also art, architecture, a gathering space, a statement of power, an economic project employing craftsmen. The Nazca lines might similarly embody multiple intentions and meanings that aren't mutually exclusive. What's clear is the effort invested. Thousands of lines, hundreds of figures, spread across nearly 200 square miles. This represents generations of work. Families or communities must have maintained the lines, clearing them periodically as wind-blown sand threatened to cover them. The lines persisted for centuries, suggesting their importance was sustained across generations of Nazca people. The preservation of the lines is another mystery. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, receiving almost no rainfall. The surface is stable, undisturbed by vegetation or erosion. The lines persist because conditions are perfect for their preservation. Change the climate slightly, add a bit more rain, and the lines would have washed away centuries ago. It's almost as if the landscape itself was designed to preserve them. But this raises questions. Did the Nazca choose this location because they knew the lines would persist? Did they have knowledge of climate patterns that told them this desert would remain dry? Or is the preservation simply fortunate accident, with thousands of other similar projects in less favourable locations lost to time? Modern threats have endangered the lines. Development, roads, foot traffic, and vehicle tracks have damaged some figures. There have been conservation efforts, and the area is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site with restricted access. But protection is challenging across such a vast area. Satellite imagery has revealed new lines previously unknown, showing that even in the age of aerial photography, we're still discovering the full extent of what the Nazca created. Some of the most intriguing lines are the long straight ones that run for miles across the landscape, ignoring topography, maintaining their bearing with remarkable consistency. Creating a straight line over miles requires skill. Slight errors accumulate over distance, and without constant checking and adjustment, lines curve or wander. Yet the Nazca lines maintain their straightness, suggesting sophisticated surveying techniques or remarkable attention to detail. How did they maintain straightness over such distances? Probably with simple methods, sighting along stakes placed at intervals, using ropes or chains to measure, having workers stationed at regular points to ensure alignment. It's not mysterious technically, but it's impressive organisationally. Creating a line miles long requires coordination, communication, and sustained effort that doesn't waver or drift off course. Imagine yourself as a Nazca worker, perhaps 1,500 years ago. You're part of a team assigned to create or maintain one of the lines. You walk the desert in the early morning before the heat becomes unbearable. Ahead, you see the line stretching to the horizon, perfectly straight, defined by cleared ground against the pebbly desert surface. Your task today is to walk the line, clearing any sand that has blown onto it, removing any stones that have tumbled into the cleared path, ensuring the line remains visible and true. It's tedious work, but important. These lines are sacred, you believe. They connect your people to the gods, to the mountains where the rain comes from, to the forces that control water and fertility. Maintaining them is a spiritual duty, a form of prayer enacted through physical labour. You don't question why the lines must be so large or so straight. This is simply how it's done, as it has been done for generations before you. You might not fully understand the figures. Perhaps their creation was the work of specialists, planners who knew the sacred designs and how to execute them. You just maintain what exists, ensure it persists. But you feel the significance of the work. Walking these paths, following these lines, you're connecting with something larger than yourself, participating in traditions that define your people and their relationship with the divine and natural forces that govern existence. The Nazca lines challenge our assumptions about ancient art and purpose. We're accustomed to art being created for human viewing, for appreciation by the artist's contemporaries or by future generations. But here is art not meant for human eyes, or at least not meant to be seen as the artist intended. It's art for gods, or art as ritual, or art whose purpose transcends normal aesthetic appreciation. This suggests that ancient peoples had concerns and priorities different from ours. They invested immense effort in projects whose benefits weren't immediate or obvious. They created works that couldn't be fully appreciated by their creators. They thought in terms of cosmic relationships, of appeasing or communicating with forces beyond the human realm, of purposes that modern minds struggle to fully grasp. As you rest here, as sleep approaches, picture those lines stretching across the desert, silent under stars. Picture them as they've existed for over a millennium, through the rise and fall of civilizations, through colonial conquest and modern development. Picture them visible from orbit, from space stations, seen finally from the heights their creators could never reach, but perhaps always intended for divine viewing. The mystery of purpose persists. We may never know with certainty why the Nazca created these lines, what rituals were enacted along them, what beliefs motivated generations of effort. But the lines themselves persist, testimony to human dedication to purposes beyond the merely practical, to the creation of meaning and connection with forces greater than ourselves, to the investment of effort in works whose full significance we can admire even if we cannot fully understand. The Voynich manuscript, the book no one can read. In the Beinecker Rare Book Library at Yale University sits a book that no one can read. The Voynich manuscript, named after the book dealer who purchased it in 1912, is a medieval codex of about 240 pages, written in an unknown script, illustrated with bizarre drawings of plants that don't match known species, astronomical diagrams that defy interpretation, and human figures engaged in mysterious activities. Despite being studied by professional cryptographers, linguists and scholars for over a century, the text remains undeciphered. It may be an elaborate hoax, or it may be a genuine document in a language or cipher we haven't yet cracked. The manuscript dates to the early 15th century based on radiocarbon dating of the vellum and analysis of the ink. So it's genuinely old, not a modern forgery. The handwriting appears consistent throughout, suggesting a single author or scribe working in a unified style. The text flows naturally, with what appears to be normal word and sentence structure, though the individual characters don't correspond to any known alphabet. The script itself is beautiful, graceful, flowing characters that suggest a practiced hand comfortable with writing. There are about 20-30 distinct characters, used in various combinations to form words. Some characters appear frequently, others rarely. Statistical analysis shows patterns consistent with natural language. Certain character combinations appear often, others never. There seem to be different dialects or styles in different sections of the manuscript, as if different topics required different vocabulary. The illustrations are even stranger than the text. One section appears botanical, showing drawings of plants with roots, stems, leaves, and flowers. But the plants don't match any known species. Some have been identified as crude representations of known medicinal herbs, but most are unlike anything in nature. Plants with impossible root systems, flowers that violate basic botanical principles, leaves arranged in physically improbable ways. Another section seems astronomical or astrological. Circular diagrams show arrangements of symbols, some resembling zodiacal imagery, but not quite matching standard astrological traditions. There are nude female figures in some diagrams, holding stars or standing within celestial spheres. The symbolism is unclear. Is this cosmology, astrology, some form of ritual magic? A third section shows what appear to be water systems or baths. Nude women bathe in interconnected pools, with pipes or channels connecting various vessels. Is this a practical diagram of medieval plumbing? A pharmaceutical illustration showing water purification? A ritual bathing system for a religious order? The purpose is opaque. Throughout the manuscript, the text accompanies the illustrations, presumably explaining or describing what is shown. But without being able to read the text, we can only guess at meanings. Is the botanical section a herbal, a compendium of medicinal plants? Is the astronomical section a manual for casting horoscopes or a philosophical treatise on cosmology? We simply don't know. The manuscript's history adds to the mystery. Before Wilfrid Voynich acquired it in 1912, it was owned by the Jesuit College in Italy. Before that, its provenance becomes murky. There are suggestions it was once owned by Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who supposedly believed it was the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th century friar known for his interest in secret codes and alchemy. But this attribution is speculative, and most scholars doubt the Bacon connection. Professional cryptographers have attempted to decipher the Voynich manuscript. During World War II, codebreakers who had cracked complex military ciphers tried their skills on it without success. Modern computer analysis has been applied. Statistical methods, AI algorithms, pattern recognition software, all have failed to crack the code or identify the language. Some researchers have proposed it's not a cipher at all, but a constructed language, an artificial script created specifically for this manuscript. Others suggest it might be a form of medical or alchemical shorthand, meaningful to its creator but not designed for others to read. Still others argue it's an elaborate hoax, meaningless gibberish dressed up to look important, created to fool a wealthy buyer into purchasing a worthless book. The hoax theory has proponents, but it faces problems. Creating over 200 pages of consistent gibberish that mimics natural language statistically is remarkably difficult. Modern attempts to create meaningless text that appears language-like quickly break down. Patterns emerge that reveal the text's artificial nature. The Voynich manuscript doesn't show these breakdown patterns. If it's a hoax, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one. Moreover, what would be the motivation? Hoaxes are usually created for profit or to fool specific people, but we don't know of anyone who was fooled by the Voynich manuscript in a way that benefited the hoaxer. If it was created to sell, it must have been a speculative venture, with the hoaxer investing months or years of work in hopes of eventually finding a buyer. Possible, but it seems a lot of effort for uncertain reward. The genuine alternatives are equally strange. If it's a real text in an unknown script, why has it remained undeciphered? Languages, even dead ones, usually yield to sustained cryptographic analysis. Even if the vocabulary is unknown, patterns emerge that reveal grammatical structures, word boundaries, and eventually allow for comparison with known languages. The Voynich manuscript has resisted all such analysis. Perhaps it's encoded not just in an unknown script but in an unknown language, a language that was never widely spoken and has left no other traces. Or perhaps it's in a known language but with such extensive encoding or abbreviation that the underlying language is thoroughly obscured. Some researchers have claimed breakthroughs, declaring they've identified the language as Latin or Hebrew or Ukrainian, but none of these claims have held up to scrutiny. The manuscript remains stubbornly silent. The botanical section is particularly frustrating. If we could identify even a few of the plants, we might narrow down the geographic region or cultural context. But the plants, as drawn, don't exist. Some might be stylized or fanciful representations of real species, but if so, the stylization is so extreme that identification is impossible. The artist either had a poor grasp of botany, or was depicting plants from imagination rather than observation, or was drawing real plants in such a peculiar style that their actual identity is disguised. Imagine yourself as a scribe in 15th century Europe, perhaps a monk in a monastery, perhaps a physician's assistant, perhaps a scholar's student. You're transcribing or creating this manuscript for reasons known to you. Perhaps you're recording secret knowledge, herbal remedies, astrological practices, alchemical procedures, in a cipher to protect it from the uninitiated. Perhaps you're creating a prayer book or meditation manual in a private script, meaningful to you and your religious community but opaque to outsiders. You work carefully, your pen moving across vellum in graceful strokes. The characters flow naturally. This is a script you know well, not something you're struggling with. The illustrations you draw carefully, trying to capture botanical details or astronomical relationships or ritual procedures. To you, this all makes sense. You're creating something meaningful, important, worth the months or years of effort. But somehow your work survives while the key to understanding it does not. Perhaps you intended to teach others this script but died before you could. Perhaps the knowledge was deliberately lost, suppressed by authorities who found it heretical or dangerous. Perhaps simple chance intervened. Libraries burned, students died, communities disbanded, and the knowledge of how to read this script vanished. Now, centuries later, scholars examine your work with sophisticated tools you couldn't have imagined. They analyze character frequencies, search for patterns, compare your script to every known alphabet and writing system. And still, they cannot read what you wrote. Your words remain locked away, your knowledge inaccessible, your purpose mysterious. The Voynich manuscript sits in its climate-controlled library, available for viewing by qualified researchers, digitized and freely available online for anyone to study. Yet it remains unread, its secrets preserved not by being hidden, but by being written in a script no one can crack. It is simultaneously one of the most studied and least understood documents in human history. Perhaps someday someone will have the key insight that unlocks it. Perhaps a new analytical technique or a chance discovery of related documents will finally reveal what the Voynich manuscript says. Or perhaps it will remain forever mysterious, a book whose purpose and content died with its creator, leaving only beautiful, meaningless marks on vellum to puzzle future generations. As sleep claims you, as consciousness fades, picture that manuscript sitting in its library waiting. Picture scholars bent over it, frustrated by its resistance to understanding. Picture the original scribe working by candlelight, creating something important, something meaningful. Something that would outlast them by centuries but remain forever incomprehensible to those who came after. The mystery persists, silent and profound, a reminder that not all ancient messages can be decoded, that some knowledge may be truly lost, that human history contains silences we cannot fill no matter how sophisticated our tools become. The Sacsayhuaman megalith, stones that fit perfectly. Above the city of Cusco in Peru, at an altitude of over 12,000 feet, stands a fortress or temple. Scholars debate its purpose, called Sacsayhuaman. The structure consists of massive limestone blocks fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed and you cannot slide a piece of paper between the stones. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons. They are not rectangular or uniform, but are cut into complex polygonal shapes with many angles, each one unique, each fitting perfectly with its neighbours in a puzzle of stone. The precision is what staggers modern engineers. These aren't simple rectangular blocks stacked in courses, which would be challenging enough at this scale. These are irregular polygons, some with a dozen or more angles, each angle cut precisely to match the corresponding angle on adjacent stones. The three-dimensional fit is perfect. The stones mesh not just at their faces but in depth, interlocking in ways that would be difficult to achieve even with modern computer-controlled stone-cutting tools. How did the Inca, or their predecessors, since there's debate about whether the Inca built this or merely inherited it, achieve such precision? They supposedly lacked iron tools, working instead with bronze and stone implements. They had no wheeled vehicles for transport. They lacked draft animals capable of moving stones weighing many tons. Yet somehow they quarried these massive blocks, transported them to the site, shaped them into complex irregular forms, and fitted them together with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. The conventional explanation involves patient labour and clever techniques. The stones were quarried using bronze tools and stone hammers, probably with the help of wooden wedges driven into cracks and then soaked with water to expand and split the rock. They were transported using log rollers and large teams of workers pulling on ropes. The shaping was done through patient pecking and grinding, slowly removing stone until the desired form emerged. For fitting the stones together, experiments have shown possible techniques. One stone would be placed, and then the next stone would be worked against it, perhaps with the help of clay or other material to mark the high spots, then removed and ground down at those spots, then tried again. Through iteration, a close fit could be achieved. For very large stones, the work might have been done in place, with the stone positioned approximately correct, and then the final fitting done by removing material while the stone sat on its neighbours. These techniques work. Modern stonemasons using ancient methods have created similar fits, demonstrating that it's possible without modern tools. But the time required is enormous. Creating a single perfect fit might take weeks. A wall with dozens of such stones might represent years or decades of sustained effort. The total labour investment across all of Sacsayhuaman is almost incomprehensible. Yet there's more to the mystery. The purpose of such precision is unclear. Structurally, it's unnecessary. Mortar would work fine, and indeed most ancient civilizations used mortar for stone construction. The Inca used mortar elsewhere. Why not here? The usual explanation is seismic stability. The precise fit allows the stones to shift slightly during earthquakes without the wall collapsing. Peru is seismically active, and this explanation has merit. But it doesn't fully satisfy. Yes, the close fit provides earthquake resistance, but you don't need perfection for that. Close tolerance with some flexibility would work just as well. The absolute precision, the impossibility of sliding paper between stones, seems excessive for purely practical purposes. It suggests other motivations, perhaps aesthetic, perhaps ritual, perhaps displaying capability as a form of political power. Some of the stones at Sacsayhuaman show evidence of vitrification or melting, surfaces that appear to have been subjected to extreme heat. This has led to fringe theories about advanced technology, about some kind of heat ray or plasma torch that could soften stone and allow it to be shaped or fused. These theories are not taken seriously by mainstream archaeology, but they highlight genuine puzzles in the stoneworking. The vitrification, where it exists, probably has a conventional explanation. Perhaps lightning strikes, perhaps ancient fires that affected exposed surfaces, perhaps misinterpretation of weathering patterns. But it's another detail that doesn't quite fit the standard narrative, another anomaly that keeps the mystery alive. The site itself is imposing. 3-tiered walls, each made from these massive stones, zigzag across the hilltop. The largest stones are in the lowest wall, some weighing over 100 tons. The walls stretch for hundreds of meters, a statement of power or devotion or capability visible from Cusco below. The Inca, or their predecessors, clearly intended to impress, to demonstrate that they could achieve what others could not. Spanish conquistadors who saw Sacsayhuaman shortly after conquering the Inca were amazed. They attributed the construction to demons or giants, unable to believe humans could have built it. Later they used the site as a quarry, removing stones to build Spanish Cusco. Much of Sacsayhuaman was destroyed or dismantled, but what remains still impresses. Modern attempts to understand the construction have involved experiments. Teams have tried to replicate the stonework using ancient tools and methods. Results have been mixed. Yes, it's possible to shape stones and fit them together with bronze tools and patience. But the time required is enormous, and achieving the level of precision seen at Sacsayhuaman in the experiments has proved elusive. The experiments demonstrate possibility, not ease. There's also the question of knowledge transfer. How did the Inca, or their predecessors, develop these techniques? Stoneworking is a craft that requires training, that accumulates knowledge over generations. Somewhere there must have been a tradition of master masons, of techniques passed from teacher to student, of accumulated wisdom about working with stone. Yet we have no records of this tradition, no training manuals, no descriptions of the techniques used. Perhaps the knowledge was considered sacred or secret, transmitted orally within guilds or families of stoneworkers. Perhaps it was lost when Spanish conquest disrupted Inca society. Perhaps it's preserved in traditions we haven't recognized as relevant. The silence of the historical record is frustrating. We have the results but not the methods, the effects but not the causes. Imagine yourself as an Inca stoneworker, or perhaps as a member of an earlier culture whose skills the Inca inherited. You stand before a massive stone, perhaps weighing 50 tons, roughly shaped but not yet fitted to its place in the wall. Your task is to refine its shape so it fits perfectly against the stones already in place. You know the techniques. Your father taught you, and his father taught him, in a line stretching back generations. You study the gap where this stone will fit. You visualize how the surfaces must meet, what angles are required. You direct your assistants to position the stone approximately. Then you begin work, marking, chipping, grinding. The stone yields slowly to your tools. You work for days, weeks, checking the fit repeatedly, removing material in tiny increments. The work is tedious but absorbing. You know when you're done, the stone will sit so perfectly that no gap will be visible, that the fit will be so tight that the wall will stand for centuries, for millennia perhaps. Why this obsession with perfection? Partly it's professional pride. You're a master craftsman, and perfect work is your standard. Partly it's religious or ritual. These stones are for the gods or the emperor, and they must be without flaw. Partly it's structural. You know from experience that precise fits create stronger walls. All these motivations interweave, creating a culture that values this kind of work, that invests the time and effort required, that produces results that will amaze people thousands of years in the future. The stones of Sacsayhuaman remain, testimony to that investment. They've survived earthquakes that destroyed Spanish colonial buildings. They've outlasted the empire that built them. They continue to pose questions we struggle to answer fully. How did ancient stoneworkers, with tools we consider primitive, achieve precision that challenges modern capabilities? What motivated such extraordinary effort? What knowledge have we lost about working with stone? About shaping and fitting massive blocks? About creating structures that endure? As you drift towards sleep, picture those walls as they stand today, visited by tourists who run their hands along the seams, amazed that no gap exists. Picture them as they were when new, perhaps plastered or painted, part of a complex whose full extent and purpose we can only guess at. Picture the workers who created them, their hands calloused from years of working stone, their eyes able to judge angles and fits with a precision born from endless practice. The mystery of Sacsayhuaman is a mystery of human capability and cultural priorities. We can explain in principle how it was done. We can demonstrate that ancient tools could shape these stones, but the gap between explaining in principle and truly understanding in practice remains. The stones sit in their precise places, fitted perfectly, challenging each new generation to understand how and why ancient peoples achieved what still seems nearly impossible. The Longyu Caves, carved from living rock. In Zhejiang province in eastern China, discovered by accident in 1992 when a local farmer decided to pump water from what he thought was a natural pond, lie a series of enormous artificial caves. The Longyu Caves consist of at least 24 large grottos carved directly from solid siltstone, featuring high ceilings supported by evenly distributed pillars, walls decorated with intricate patterns, and floor areas spanning thousands of square meters. The scale is extraordinary, the precision is puzzling, and the date, purpose, and creators are completely unknown. The caves date to sometime before the Qin dynasty, so at least 2,000 years old, possibly much older. No historical records mention them, no local legends preserved knowledge of them. They were completely forgotten until accidentally rediscovered when farmers pumped out one cave that had filled with water over the centuries. The lack of any historical documentation is itself a mystery. How do you create something on this scale and have it completely disappear from collective memory? Each cave is massive. Cave 1, the largest, covers about 2,000 square meters with a volume of nearly 20,000 cubic meters. That's roughly equivalent to excavating a 4-story building carved entirely from solid rock. The ceiling rises to 30 meters at its highest point. Stone pillars, carved from the same bedrock as the cave itself, support the ceiling. The walls are not smooth but are covered with chisel marks, parallel lines creating a distinctive herringbone pattern that covers every surface. The chisel marks are remarkably consistent. They run in parallel lines at a precise angle, creating a pattern that is both decorative and structural. The ridges may have helped prevent the walls from delaminating or developing cracks. But the consistency of the pattern across such vast areas suggests either extraordinary discipline by individual workers or extremely rigid quality control across many workers. The pattern never wavers, never becomes sloppy, maintains its rhythm across thousands of square meters of wall surface. The scale of excavation is difficult to comprehend. Archaeologists estimate that roughly 1 million cubic meters of rock was removed to create the known caves. This is an enormous quantity. Millions of tons of siltstone quarried from underground, brought to the surface and disposed of somewhere. Where did it all go? No massive dumps of excavated stone have been found nearby. Was the stone used for something? Scattered so thoroughly that it cannot be identified? Dumped into rivers and washed away? The excavation method appears to have been simple but laborious, chiseling. Workers carved downward from the surface, gradually deepening the caves, removing stone bit by bit. The chisel marks suggest they worked systematically, covering each surface with that distinctive angled pattern. But the effort required is staggering. Working with the technology available 2,000 years ago, bronze or early iron tools, removing 1 million cubic meters of rock would have taken enormous numbers of workers enormous amounts of time. Some researchers have proposed that thousands of workers laboured for decades. Others suggest the work might have spanned centuries, with different generations continuing the project. But this raises the question of motivation. What purpose justified such extraordinary sustained effort? What were these caves for? Various theories have been proposed. Perhaps they were tombs, prepared for emperors or nobles who were never buried there. But the caves don't match typical Chinese tomb architecture of any period. There are no burial chambers, no elaborate decorations beyond the chisel patterns, no inscriptions or artifacts suggesting funerary purpose. Perhaps they were military installations, underground fortifications or storage facilities. The robust construction would have provided protection, but why create so many? Why make them so large? And why would military installations be completely absent from historical records? Ancient China kept extensive records of military constructions. Perhaps they were mines, excavated to extract the siltstone for building materials or mineral content. But the pattern of excavation doesn't match mining practices. Mines are typically excavated to follow mineral veins, creating irregular tunnels. These caves are deliberately shaped spaces with aesthetic considerations, not the organic tunnels of mining operations. Perhaps they were religious or ceremonial spaces, temples or ritual centers for belief systems that have left no other trace. The scale and effort would be consistent with religious motivation, but again, the complete absence from historical records is puzzling. Major religious sites were typically documented, integrated into historical narratives, remembered in tradition. The most puzzling feature is the water. The caves were filled with water when discovered, completely flooded. How long had they been flooded? Were they intentionally flooded after abandonment? Did they flood naturally over centuries due to rising water tables or climate changes? The water preserved the caves by making them inaccessible. But it also destroyed any artifacts or evidence that might have explained their purpose. When the water was pumped out, the caves were essentially empty. No tools left behind, no pottery, no inscriptions, no human remains, nothing that might indicate who built them or why. It's as if the caves were deliberately cleared before abandonment, with anything that might identify their purpose carefully removed. Or perhaps the centuries of flooding washed away all traces, leaving only bare stone. The engineering is impressive. The ceilings are stable despite the weight of rock above them. The pillars are positioned to distribute loads effectively. The excavation avoided creating stress concentrations that would cause cracks or collapse. This suggests sophisticated understanding of rock mechanics, of how forces distribute through stone structures, of how to safely excavate large underground spaces. Modern engineers examining the caves have noted that the design is sound. that the distribution of pillars and the shaping of the spaces follow principles that would be taught in modern structural engineering. The ancient builders understood, through experience or intuition, how to create stable underground structures. They knew where pillars needed to be, how thick they needed to be, how to shape ceilings to distribute weight. Imagine yourself as a worker in these caves, perhaps 2,000 years ago or more. You descend into the excavation, which is gradually being carved deeper. The light is dim, perhaps oil lamps or torches provide illumination, creating flickering shadows on the walls. You take your position in a team of workers, all chiseling in unison, creating that distinctive herringbone pattern on the walls. The work is hard, repetitive, dusty. Stone chips fly with each strike. Your arms ache from the sustained effort, but you continue, maintaining the rhythm, keeping the pattern consistent with your neighbour's work. You don't know why you're doing this. Perhaps you're a conscripted labourer, required to work a certain number of days per year on this mysterious project. Perhaps you're a paid craftsman, skilled in stonework, employed on a massive construction project whose purpose you don't question. Around you, hundreds of others work, chiselling, removing stone, hauling debris to the surface. The cave echoes with the sound of tools striking rock, a rhythmic percussion that fills the space. You are part of something enormous, something that will outlast you by millennia, though you cannot know that. You simply work, day after day, creating spaces whose purpose and meaning will be completely forgotten within a few generations of your death. The mystery of the Longyu caves is compounded by their completeness. They were clearly finished, or at least brought to a point where work stopped deliberately rather than being abandoned mid-excavation. The surfaces are fully patterned, the pillars completed, the spaces shaped and refined, and then nothing. They were emptied, abandoned, forgotten. What change that made this enormous investment pointless? What shift in priorities or circumstances led to their abandonment? Researchers continue to study the caves, but answers remain elusive. Archaeologists search nearby areas for any evidence of related structures or artifacts. Historians comb ancient texts for any hint of reference. Engineers analyze the structural design, but the caves keep their secrets. They exist, massive and undeniable, yet offer no clear explanation of who made them, why they made them, or what caused them to be so thoroughly forgotten. As you rest here, breathing slowly, picture those caves in their current state. Empty, drained, open to visitors who walk through spaces carved from solid rock by unknown hands for unknown purposes. Picture them as they were when being created, filled with workers, echoing with the sound of tools, slowly growing deeper and larger as years passed. Picture them in the centuries they sat, flooded and forgotten, dark and silent, preserving a mystery that would eventually be revealed when curiosity led someone to pump away the water and expose what lay beneath. The Longyu caves remind us that not all ancient works have explanations. Sometimes the evidence exists, but the context is completely lost. We can see what was done, can even understand how it was done, but cannot answer why. The caves are a monument to unknown purpose, to effort that has outlasted all memory of its motivation, to the humbling fact that human history contains silences that even the most thorough archaeology cannot fill. The Piri Reis map, coastlines that shouldn't exist. In 1929, a group of scholars working in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul discovered an unusual map. The Piri Reis map, named after the Ottoman admiral and cartographer who created it in 1513, showed the coasts of Europe, North Africa and South America with remarkable accuracy for its time. But it also showed something that shouldn't have been possible: the northern coast of Antarctica, depicted as ice-free, showing details that wouldn't be confirmed until modern submarine surveys in the 1950s revealed the coastline beneath the ice sheet. The map is fragmented, only about 1/3 of the original survives, but what remains is extraordinary. It shows the Atlantic Ocean with Europe and Africa on the east, the Atlantic Islands, and the coast of South America extending far to the south. At the southern extreme, the map shows a coastline that appears to be Antarctica, though the map predates the official discovery of Antarctica by over 300 years. Piri Reis himself provides some clues about his sources. Notes on the map indicate he compiled it from about 20 older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great or even earlier. He mentions using a map captured from a Spanish sailor who had sailed with Columbus, giving him access to information from the New World. But he also indicates that some of his source maps were extremely ancient, dating to periods when, according to conventional history, accurate world maps should not have existed. The controversy centres on the southern coastline. If this is indeed Antarctica, and the match between the map and the actual coastline is striking, how did the cartographers know what it looked like? Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and the coastline beneath the ice wasn't mapped until seismic and sonar surveys in the mid-20th century. Yet the Piri Reis map, created in 1513, shows features that closely match the actual coastline. Skeptics argue that the supposed Antarctic coastline is actually a misdrawn South American coast, extended too far south, or perhaps represents coastline that doesn't exist at all. Medieval and early modern maps are full of speculative geography, coastlines drawn where cartographers imagined they might be rather than from actual observation. Perhaps the Piri Reis map is just another example of creative cartography rather than evidence of extraordinary ancient knowledge. But proponents point to specific features. The map shows mountains along the coast in positions that match actual mountain ranges in Antarctica. It shows bays and inlets that correspond to features of the real coastline. The general shape matches Antarctica's northern coast with greater accuracy than random invention would produce. Statistical analysis suggests the match is too good to be purely coincidental. Moreover, the map shows this Antarctic coast as ice-free. Today, Antarctica is buried under kilometres of ice, but geological evidence suggests that Antarctica was indeed ice-free in the distant past, perhaps 6,000 to 15,000 years ago, or even earlier. If the map's source materials really did depict an ice-free Antarctica, those sources would have to date back to a time before the ice sheets formed, to the end of the last ice age or earlier. This raises uncomfortable questions. Who was making accurate maps of Antarctica 10,000 or more years ago? The conventional narrative of human history suggests that civilization developed only in the last 5,000, 6,000 years. Before that, humans were hunter-gatherers or early agriculturalists, supposedly lacking the organization and technology for long-distance maritime exploration and accurate cartography. Yet if the Piri Reis map really does show Antarctic coastlines mapped before the ice covered them, someone was doing sophisticated cartography at a time when it supposedly didn't exist. Some researchers have proposed that an ancient, sophisticated civilization preceded known history, that this civilization had advanced maritime technology and cartographic capability, and that fragments of their knowledge survived in maps that were copied and recopied over millennia, until some ended up in the sources Piri Reis used. This idea of a lost civilization is controversial, dismissed by mainstream archaeologists, but persistent in alternative historical theories. The evidence for such a civilization is thin. We have no ruins, no artifacts, no clear signs of an advanced culture dating back 10,000 or 15,000 years. The archaeological record shows slow, gradual development of civilization, not the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge. Proponents argue that most traces of an ancient civilization would have been destroyed by the rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, which inundated coastal areas where such a civilization might have flourished. But this is speculative. An absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as the saying goes, though it's also not positive evidence for the existence of something. The Piri Reis map is not alone. Other early modern maps show similar anomalies. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 shows Antarctica with details that shouldn't have been known. The Boachi map of 1737 shows Antarctica as two separate landmasses, which is correct. Beneath the ice, Antarctica is indeed divided by a water channel, though this wasn't confirmed until the 20th century. These maps suggest a tradition of accurate geographic knowledge that seems inconsistent with the official history of exploration. The counter-argument is that these apparent accuracies are coincidences, that cartographers were making educated guesses that happened to be correct. Medieval mapmakers knew the world was round, understood that continents probably existed in unexplored regions, and sketched in coastlines based on symmetry and speculation. Some of these speculations happened to be accurate, creating the illusion of inexplicable knowledge. This explanation is less exciting than lost civilizations, but more consistent with known history. Piri Reis himself was a capable cartographer and admiral with access to the best geographic knowledge of his time. He collected maps, consulted with sailors and explorers, and synthesized information from multiple sources. He was working at a time when European exploration was rapidly expanding knowledge of world geography. It's possible that his sources included informal reports from explorers who had sailed farther south than official records indicate, or who had encountered indigenous peoples with their own geographic knowledge. The indigenous peoples of South America had maritime traditions. The Polynesians were extraordinary navigators who populated the Pacific Islands. Various cultures had trading networks that spanned surprising distances. Perhaps knowledge of southern coastlines was circulating through these networks, eventually reaching European cartographers through intermediaries. This is speculative but more plausible than ancient civilizations with advanced technology. Yet the mystery persists because the accuracy, if it is accuracy, is too good for the supposed sources and methods. Random guessing doesn't produce maps that match reality as closely as the Peary Ray's map appears to match Antarctica. Reports from indigenous people, who had never themselves seen Antarctica, couldn't provide the detailed coastline information. There seems to be a disconnect between what should have been possible and what the map apparently shows. Modern analysis of the map has used computational methods to compare the depicted coastlines with actual geography. Results are mixed. Some analyses find strong correlations, others find the match less impressive than initially claimed. The interpretation depends partly on how you orient the map, how you account for scale distortions, and how much latitude you give for cartographic errors versus considering features as accurate. Imagine yourself as Peary Rees, working in the early 16th century. You've collected maps from across the Mediterranean world and beyond. Some are recent, some are quite old, copied many times over centuries. You spread them out on your work table, comparing coastlines, noting where they agree and disagree. Your task is to create a unified map incorporating the best knowledge available. As you work, you notice strange things. Some of your source maps show coastlines in regions you know haven't been explored. Are these speculative, or do they represent actual knowledge from ancient voyages? The maps themselves don't explain. You can only copy what you see, adding notes about your sources and uncertainties. You create your map as accurately as you can, knowing it will be incomplete and imperfect, but hoping it will be useful. You cannot know that 500 years later scholars will pore over your work, debating whether you somehow preserved knowledge of Antarctic coastlines that wouldn't be officially mapped for centuries. To you, you're simply doing your best with available sources, creating a practical tool for navigation and general geographic understanding. The mysteries are in your sources, not in your work. You're a compiler, not a creator of lost knowledge. The Peary Race map sits in the Topkapi Palace, a fragment of vellum with ink lines showing coastlines, islands, compass roses and notes in Ottoman Turkish. It is simultaneously a historical document, a beautiful artifact, and a mystery. Does it show knowledge that shouldn't have existed? Or is it simply a well-executed example of early 16th century cartography with coincidental similarities to actual geography? The debate continues, and the map offers no definitive answer, only its lines on vellum, silent testimony to geography mapped centuries before the official discoveries. As sleep approaches, picture those ancient cartographers, unknown and unnamed, creating source maps that Peary Rays would eventually consult. Picture them sailing to unknown coasts, recording what they saw, creating maps that would be copied and recopied over centuries until the knowledge, if it was knowledge, became confused with speculation and imagination. Picture the chain of transmission, each copying introducing small errors or modifications, until finally Peary Race compiled them into his great map, preserving perhaps fragments of very ancient geographic knowledge, or perhaps only coincidences that would tantalize future scholars. The mystery of the map is a mystery of transmission and interpretation. Even if the Peary Race map shows Antarctica accurately, we don't know what that means. Ancient voyage, lost civilization, lucky speculation? Each explanation has problems, yet the map exists, showing what it shows, resistant to definitive interpretation, remaining mysterious despite centuries of study. The submerged city of Yonaguni, natural or carved. Off the coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of Japan, at a depth of about 25 to 40 meters, lies a formation that has sparked fierce debate for decades. The Yonaguni Monument, as it's called, consists of massive terrace structures with apparent right angles, flat surfaces, and features that some interpret as artificial: stairs, roads, walls, even carved animal figures. Others argue it's entirely natural, a product of geological processes and undersea erosion. The controversy remains unresolved, with passionate advocates on both sides. The formation was discovered in 1987 by a local dive operator exploring the area. The main structure is a massive stepped pyramid-like formation, roughly 75 metres long and 25 metres high. It features multiple flat terraces connected by what appear to be stairs or stepped levels. Right angles are prominent. There are linear features that look like walls or roads. Some areas show what might be tool marks, parallel grooves in the stone that suggest cutting or carving. Proponents of the artificial origin point to these features. Nature doesn't typically create perfect right angles, they argue. The parallel grooves look like saw marks or chisel marks, not natural weathering. The stepped terraces are too regular, too symmetrical. The overall layout suggests planning and purpose, not random geological processes. Some researchers have identified what they believe are specific architectural features, a turtle carving, a triangular pool, a star-shaped platform, that make no sense as natural formations. Skeptics respond that all these features can be explained geologically. The rock in this area is sandstone, which naturally fractures along parallel planes due to its layered structure. These fractures create flat surfaces and right angles without any human intervention. Erosion by ocean currents preferentially removes softer layers, while leaving harder layers as apparent terraces, creating stepped formations. The stairs and roads are natural features of how this particular sandstone weathers when submerged. The debate has been contentious. Marine geologists who have examined the site mostly conclude it's natural, citing numerous similar formations found in oceans worldwide, all known to be natural. Archaeologists are skeptical because no artifacts have been recovered from the site. No tools, no pottery, no human remains, nothing except the rock formations themselves. If this was a built structure, where is the evidence of human presence? But absence of artifacts might be explained by the site's history. If it was submerged at the end of the last ice age, when sea levels rose dramatically, it has been underwater for roughly 10,000 years. Ocean currents and marine organisms would have had millennia to scour the site. Any artifacts not made of stone would have degraded. Even stone tools might have been scattered or buried under sediment. The lack of artifacts doesn't prove the site is natural. It's consistent with a very ancient artificial site that has been submerged for millennia. The dating is crucial. Sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If the Yonaguni monument was above sea level before this, it would have been during a period when, according to conventional archaeology, there were no civilizations capable of monumental architecture anywhere in the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the oldest known monumental structure, dates to roughly this same period and was a huge surprise to archaeologists. The idea that there was another such structure in Japan, now submerged, challenges our understanding even further. Some researchers have proposed that if the Yonaguni monument is artificial, it might have been created by the Jomon culture, ancient inhabitants of Japan known for sophisticated pottery, but not for monumental stone architecture. Perhaps the Jomon were more advanced than the archaeological record suggests, capable of working stone on a large scale. But this is speculative, and most Jomon experts are skeptical that their culture produced architecture like Yonaguni. Another possibility is that humans found a natural formation and modified it, adding stairs or pathways, carving features into existing stone. This would explain why the overall structure looks natural, because it is, while also accounting for features that seem artificial. This middle position satisfies neither side of the debate, but might be closest to truth if the site has any human involvement at all. The underwater visibility at Yonaguni is often poor, and strong currents make diving there challenging. This has limited detailed study. Photogrammetry and underwater archaeology techniques have been applied, but comprehensive systematic study is difficult. Different researchers visiting at different times see different things, photograph different features, and reach different conclusions. Some claimed artificial features are controversial, even among those who believe the site is man-made. The turtle carving, for example, looks to some observers like a clear representation of a turtle, while to others it's just weathered rock that vaguely suggests an animal shape, the kind of pattern recognition false positive humans are prone to. The star-shaped platform might be a natural depression, with erosion patterns that happen to create a star-like shape. The parallel grooves that some interpret as tool marks are particularly interesting. They appear in multiple locations, running in parallel lines with regular spacing. Proponents argue these can't be natural. They're too regular, too consistent. Skeptics respond that sandstone under stress can develop parallel fracture patterns, that geological processes can create regular spacing without human intervention. Recent sonar and underwater laser scanning have provided detailed 3D models of the site, allowing researchers to analyse it without diving. These detailed models show that while many features are consistent with natural geological processes, some areas are harder to explain naturally. The debate continues, with new data supporting both interpretations depending on how it's analysed. Imagine yourself as a diver, descending to the Yonaguni monument for the first time. The water is relatively clear today. You can see perhaps 15-20 metres. As you descend, the massive formation emerges from the blue-green water. At first, it looks like a natural underwater cliff, but as you get closer, features become apparent. There are flat surfaces too flat. There are corners too sharp. There are what look like steps too regular. You swim along what appears to be a wall, running your hand along the stone. It's rough with marine growth, but beneath that the surface is flat, smooth. You reach a corner where two surfaces meet at a perfect right angle. Nature can do this, you know, but it's striking nonetheless. You swim up to what looks like a stairway, each step about the same height as the last. You feel a strange sense of presence, as if you're swimming through ruins rather than exploring a natural rock formation. But you also know that human pattern recognition is powerful, that we see faces in clouds, that we interpret ambiguous shapes as meaningful. Perhaps you're seeing purpose where there is only accident. Perhaps these features that seem artificial are just geological coincidence. You take photographs, collect measurements, and return to the surface, more uncertain than when you descended. The Yonaguni monument exists in a state of epistemological uncertainty. It cannot be definitively proven to be artificial without finding clear evidence of human work. Tool marks under microscopic analysis, artifacts, inscriptions, something unambiguously man-made. But it also cannot be definitively proven to be natural without explaining every feature that looks artificial, and some features remain puzzling even to geologists who believe the site is natural overall. This uncertainty is frustrating to those who want clear answers, but it reflects the reality of interpreting ancient sites, especially ones that have been subjected to millennia of erosion, or in this case, submersion. The evidence is ambiguous. Different experts analysing the same data reach different conclusions. This doesn't mean the truth is unknowable, but it means our current evidence isn't sufficient to resolve the question definitively. The Yonaguni monument reminds us that the ocean hides much of Earth's surface from archaeological investigation. Vast areas that were dry land during the last ice age are now underwater. Any structures or settlements that existed on those lands are submerged, difficult to find and study. How many other sites like Yonaguni exist, undiscovered? How much of human history is hidden beneath the waves? As you rest here, breathing slowly, picture that formation as it might have been 12,000 years ago, before the seas rose. Perhaps it stood above a beach, waves crashing at its base, a natural formation appreciated for its striking appearance. Or perhaps it was something more, a temple, a gathering place, a monument created by people whose names and culture have been lost to time. Picture the seas rising, gradually inundating the site, until it disappeared beneath the waves, where it would remain hidden for 10,000 years. The mystery of Yonaguni is a mystery of interpretation. We have the physical evidence, the rock formation with its puzzling features. We have competing explanations, natural formation versus human construction versus natural formation with human modification. We have passionate advocates for each position. What we lack is definitive proof that would settle the debate conclusively. So the mystery persists, the formation lying silent beneath the waves, offering ambiguous evidence that can be read multiple ways, challenging us to admit that sometimes we simply don't know, that ancient questions don't always have clear answers, that reality can be genuinely uncertain rather than merely unknown. The stone spheres of Costa Rica. Perfect geometry. In the Diquís Delta and Isla del Caño of Costa Rica, scattered through jungle and along riverbanks, are hundreds of stone spheres, some nearly perfect spheres up to 2.5 meters in diameter and weighing 15 tons. They were created by a pre-Columbian culture between 600 and 1500 CE, carved from gabbro, a hard volcanic rock. The precision of their sphericity, the effort required to create them, and their original purpose remain mysteries despite decades of archaeological study. The spheres range in size from a few centimetres to over 2 metres in diameter. The largest are remarkably spherical. Measurements show deviation from perfect sphericity of only a few millimetres, precision that would be challenging even with modern tools. They were created by pecking and grinding, using smaller stones to shape the gabbro into spherical form. No metal tools were involved. The culture that created them worked in stone and perhaps wood, without the benefit of bronze or iron. How did they achieve such precision? Creating a perfect sphere from a regular stone requires vision of the final form and careful work from all angles. You must continuously check the shape, ensuring that no one part is carved too much while others lag behind. You must understand geometry, know what a sphere is, visualize it, recognize deviations from the ideal form. This suggests sophisticated mathematical understanding, aesthetic appreciation of geometric perfection, and extraordinary patience. The effort required is substantial. Even a medium-sized sphere weighing a ton or more would require months of work by skilled craftsmen. The largest spheres, weighing 15 tons, standing taller than a person, might represent years of sustained effort. Across all the spheres, the total labour investment is enormous. Why invest such effort in creating perfect stone spheres? The original context of most spheres has been lost. When European settlers arrived in the region in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found the spheres and moved many of them, using them as decoration in gardens and public spaces. Some were broken open by treasure hunters who believed they contained gold. This destruction and displacement destroyed archaeological context that might have explained the sphere's purpose. However, careful excavation of spheres still in original context has revealed some patterns. Many were arranged in alignments, sometimes forming straight lines, sometimes curves. Some alignments point toward magnetic north or toward important landmarks. This suggests the spheres served as markers, perhaps indicating paths or boundaries, perhaps having astronomical or ritual significance. One theory proposes they represented social or political hierarchy. Larger spheres required more effort to create, so possessing one might indicate higher status. Communities or leaders might compete to create the largest or most perfect spheres as demonstrations of power and organizational capability. The spheres would be status symbols, their size and quality reflecting the prestige of those who commissioned them. Another theory suggests astronomical purposes. Some alignments correspond to solstices or equinoxes. The spheres might mark important dates in agricultural or ceremonial calendars, serving similar functions to stone circles or other megalithic astronomical markers found in various cultures. The precision of the spheres themselves might relate to understanding of celestial spheres, heavenly perfection represented in stone. Still another theory emphasizes ritual or religious significance. Perfect spheres might represent cosmological concepts, the perfection of the heavens, the cycle of time, the sun or moon. Creating them might be an act of devotion, an offering to gods, a physical manifestation of spiritual ideals. The process of creating a perfect sphere might itself be ritually significant, a meditation or spiritual practice. The truth likely involves multiple meanings. Ancient cultures rarely created things for single purposes. A European Gothic cathedral is simultaneously a place of worship, an architectural achievement, a political statement, an economic engine, and a work of art. The Costa Rican spheres might similarly embody multiple functions, ritual objects that also mark territories or astronomical alignments, status symbols that also carry cosmological meanings. What's clear is that the culture that created them valued perfection, invested enormous effort in achieving it, and sustained this tradition over centuries. The spheres are found across a wide geographic area and span multiple centuries of production. This suggests the knowledge of how to create them was transmitted across generations, that the tradition was important enough to maintain despite the effort required. Modern attempts to recreate the spheres using ancient techniques have been partially successful. Craftsmen can shape stone into roughly spherical forms using pecking and grinding. But achieving the precision of the ancient spheres is difficult. Small errors accumulate. Maintaining sphericity while working requires constant checking from multiple angles. The ancient craftsman's ability to achieve such precision without modern tools or measurement devices is impressive. Perhaps they used water leveling techniques to check symmetry, observing how water pooled on the sphere's surface to identify high spots that needed more work. Perhaps they had wooden templates or measuring devices that haven't survived archaeologically. Perhaps they developed techniques through long experience, trained eyes able to judge sphericity without instruments. We can only speculate about their exact methods. The material choice is significant. Gabbro is extremely hard, harder than marble or limestone, though softer than granite. It's difficult to carve but durable. A sphere carved from gabbro will last essentially forever, resistant to weathering, maintaining its form across millennia. The choice of such hard stone suggests the spheres were intended to endure, to last beyond their creators' lifetimes. Imagine yourself as a craftsman in pre-Columbian Costa Rica, perhaps 800 years ago. You have been commissioned to create a sphere, perhaps for a chief or for placement at an important site. You select a suitable stone from the riverbed, a water-worn boulder of gabbro, already somewhat rounded by natural processes. This will be your starting point, but much work remains. You begin pecking at the stone with smaller, harder stones, gradually shaping it. The work is slow, meditative. Days pass, then weeks, then months. You work from all angles, checking the form constantly, visualizing the perfect sphere emerging from the rough stone. Your hands are calloused, your back aches, but you continue. This is important work, skillful work, work that will outlast you. As the sphere approaches completion, the work becomes more refined. You switch to smaller stones for finer pecking, then to grinding with abrasive sand. The surface becomes smoother, the sphericity more apparent. Finally, after perhaps a year of intermittent work, the sphere is finished. You stand back to admire it, a perfect geometric form created entirely by hand from one of the hardest stones available. It will be moved to its final location, where it will sit for centuries, a testament to your skill and patience. The Costa Rican spheres have inspired various fringe theories, ancient aliens, lost civilizations, mysterious technology. These theories are unnecessary. The spheres are impressive but explicable as products of human skill, patience, and cultural values that prioritize perfection and permanence. They're mysterious not because we can't imagine how they were made, but because we don't fully understand why they were made, what cultural meanings they embodied, what purposes they served. As you drift towards sleep, picture those spheres as they sit today, some in museums, some in public parks, some still in jungle locations where they've rested for centuries. Picture them as they were when new, perhaps arranged in lines pointing to important places, perhaps painted or decorated in ways that haven't survived, perhaps surrounded by wooden structures or plantings that have long since rotted away. The spheres endure, silent testimony to a culture that valued geometric perfection enough to invest enormous effort in achieving it. The mystery of the Costa Rican spheres is gentle compared to some archaeological enigmas. We know roughly when they were made. We understand the techniques used. We can observe their remaining alignments. What we lack is the full cultural context, the meanings and purposes that motivated their creation. But this is a common loss in archaeology. Meanings are harder to preserve than objects. The spheres remain, perfect in form, mysterious in purpose, beautiful in their geometry, enduring evidence of human capability and dedication across the centuries. The mysterious tunnels of Europe, ancient underground networks. Beneath the ground across Europe from Scotland to Turkey lies a network of ancient tunnels whose age, extent and purpose remain largely mysterious. These are not natural caves but deliberately excavated passages, some barely large enough for a person to crawl through, others with standing room connecting chambers, extending for hundreds of meters, or even, some claim, for miles. They've been found beneath houses, churches, forests and fields. Tens of thousands have been discovered, and likely many more remain unknown. Beneath the ground across Europe, from Scotland to Turkey, lies a network of ancient tunnels whose age, extent and purpose remain largely mysterious. These are not natural caves but deliberately excavated passages, some barely large enough for a person to crawl through, others with standing room, connecting chambers, extending for hundreds of meters or even, some claim, for miles. They've been found beneath houses, churches, forests and fields. Tens of thousands have been discovered, and likely many more remain unknown. The tunnels are called various names in different regions: Erdstall in Germany and Austria, Schrazelloch in Switzerland, Souterrains in Scotland and Ireland. Despite regional variations, they share common features: narrow passages, low ceilings, occasional wider chambers, carefully excavated through various types of rock and soil. They date to different periods, some to medieval times, others possibly to the Neolithic, spanning thousands of years of European history. The mystery is not that the tunnels exist. Ancient peoples excavated underground spaces for various purposes across all cultures. The mystery is their specific characteristics and the lack of clear explanation for their purpose. Many tunnels show no evidence of habitation, no soot from fires, no refuse deposits, no indication people lived in them. They're too small and uncomfortable for long-term occupation. So what were they for? Various theories have been proposed. Perhaps they were hiding places, refuges during times of conflict or invasion. When raiders came, villagers could retreat underground, concealing themselves in tunnels too small for attackers to easily follow. This explanation seems plausible for some tunnels, particularly those dating to periods of known conflict. But it doesn't explain why so many exist, or why they would be excavated in peaceful times, or why some are so extensive. Perhaps they were storage spaces, used to keep food cool or to hide valuables. Underground chambers maintain relatively constant temperatures, useful for storing perishables. But many tunnels lack the features you'd expect in storage facilities. No shelves, no large chambers for bulk storage, no easy access for moving goods in and out. They seem poorly designed for practical storage. Perhaps they were religious or ritual spaces, places for ceremonies, initiations, or spiritual practices. Many cultures have used underground spaces for ritual purposes, seeing them as liminal zones between the ordinary world and the realm of spirits or gods. This might explain why the tunnels are so uncomfortable. Ritual spaces aren't meant for comfort, but for transformative experiences. However, most tunnels lack the religious art or artifacts typically found in sacred spaces. Perhaps they were connected to mining, either extracting useful minerals or exploring underground resources. But the tunnels don't follow mineral veins, don't show the irregular branching patterns of exploratory mining, and often seem to lead nowhere in particular. They appear deliberately designed as passages rather than as excavations following valuable materials. Some researchers have proposed that the tunnels formed a genuine network, connecting villages and settlements across wide areas, allowing travel and communication underground. This idea has captured popular imagination, the concept of a secret underground highway system used by ancient Europeans. However, systematic surveys have found that most tunnels are relatively short, not actually connecting to neighbouring tunnels despite being oriented in their direction. The network, if it exists, is fragmentary rather than comprehensive. The dating of the tunnels is often difficult. Without artifacts or organic material for radiocarbon dating, age must be estimated from context: the layer of soil they're dug through, their relationship to structures above ground, historical references that might describe them. Different tunnels clearly date to different periods. Some may be medieval, others could be much older, perhaps thousands of years, though proving this definitively is challenging. The excavation method was probably simple but laborious, digging with hand tools, removing soil basket by basket, supporting unstable areas with wooden beams or stone. Creating even a short tunnel would require substantial effort. A network of tunnels beneath a village or across a region would represent years or decades of work by many people. This level of investment suggests the tunnels served important purposes, whatever those were. Modern exploration of the tunnels is challenging. Many have partially collapsed, some are flooded, others are on private property or beneath buildings, making access difficult or impossible. Systematic survey of all tunnels across Europe hasn't been attempted. The task would be enormous, and new tunnels continue to be discovered during construction projects or by accident. Some of the longest and most complex tunnel systems are found in Bavaria and Austria. Here, the Erdstall tunnels often feature characteristic Schlupfe, extremely narrow passages, sometimes less than 40 centimetres in diameter, that must be crawled through. These seem deliberately narrow, beyond what would be necessary for simple passage. Why? Perhaps they served as defensive bottlenecks, places where a single defender could hold off multiple attackers. Perhaps they had ritual significance, representing a form of rebirth as one squeezed through the narrow opening into a wider chamber beyond. Imagine yourself in medieval Europe, perhaps 1,000 years ago, descending into one of these tunnels. You carry a torch or oil lamp, the only light in absolute underground darkness. The entrance is small, perhaps hidden beneath a house or barn, covered by a removable stone. You descend a rough ladder or crawl down a sloping passage. The air is cool, damp, smelling of earth and stone. The passage is narrow. You cannot stand upright but must crouch or crawl. The ceiling is close above your head, the walls within arm's reach on both sides. Your light creates dancing shadows, illuminating rough stone walls marked by the tools that excavated them. You proceed slowly, the passage turning, occasionally opening into slightly larger chambers where you can sit or kneel, then narrowing again. You might encounter a schlupf, a passage so narrow you must exhale to squeeze through, your body scraping against stone. It's uncomfortable, even frightening if you're claustrophobic, but you've done this before. You know the passage opens up on the other side. You emerge into another chamber, take a breath, and continue. Where are you going? Why are you here? Perhaps you're hiding from raiders. Better to be uncomfortable underground than captured above. Perhaps you're performing a ritual, a coming-of-age ceremony that requires you to navigate the tunnel alone. Perhaps you're simply checking the tunnel's condition, making sure it hasn't collapsed or flooded. Maintaining infrastructure your community depends on for reasons that are clear to you, but will be mysterious to archaeologists 1,000 years hence. The tunnel's distribution is puzzling. They're found across a vast area but unevenly, dense in some regions, absent in others. Some clusters are near ancient trade routes or defensive positions. Others seem randomly distributed. No clear pattern emerges that would definitively explain their locations or purposes. Some tunnels connect to known structures above ground, churches, castles, houses. These might have served as escape routes or secret passages, allowing people to flee or move unseen. But many tunnels have no obvious connection to surface structures, beginning and ending seemingly at random in fields or forests. The effort to excavate the tunnels contrasts with their apparent lack of use. Many show little sign of heavy traffic. Walls are not worn smooth by passing bodies. Floors show no deep grooves from repeated foot traffic. If these were frequently used passages, you'd expect more wear. The relatively pristine condition of many tunnels suggests they were used infrequently or for short periods. This has led some researchers to propose that the tunnels were excavated and maintained as insurance, infrastructure built in anticipation of need that might never come. Like a fallout shelter built during the Cold War but never used, the tunnels might have been created for potential emergencies or ritual uses that occurred rarely. The substantial effort to create them would be justified if the perceived threat or need was serious enough, even if that threat never materialized. As you rest here, breathing slowly, picture the extent of these underground passages, honeycomb networks beneath European soil, some still unknown, waiting to be discovered. Picture the generations of people who excavated them, maintained them, used them for purposes we can only guess at. Picture the knowledge that was lost when oral traditions ended, when the people who understood the tunnel's purposes died without passing on their knowledge. The European tunnels are a reminder that mystery exists not only in distant exotic locations, but in familiar landscapes. Beneath ordinary fields and forests, beneath cities and villages, lie passages excavated by our ancestors for reasons that remain unclear. They're not as visually impressive as pyramids, or as obviously mysterious as undeciphered scripts. But they represent the same fundamental challenge, trying to understand ancient peoples whose motivations and purposes don't always make sense to modern minds. The tunnels persist, slowly collapsing as centuries pass, gradually being forgotten or rediscovered. Each discovery adds a small piece to the puzzle, but doesn't resolve the central mystery. Why did ancient Europeans invest enormous effort in excavating thousands of underground passages? Until we find clear evidence, artifacts that indicate purpose, historical documents that describe use, or enough examples to establish definitive patterns, the tunnels remain enigmatic, silent testimony to purposes and priorities we cannot fully reconstruct from the passages themselves. The Copper Scroll, a treasure map in metal. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in caves near Qumran between 1947 and 1956, one document stands apart from all the others. The Copper Scroll, as it's called, is literally what its name suggests. A scroll made of copper, thin sheets of the metal inscribed with text and then rolled up. Unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which are religious texts written on parchment or papyrus, the Copper Scroll is a list, an inventory of treasures hidden in various locations throughout ancient Judea and Jerusalem. It describes 64 locations where gold, silver, vessels and other valuables were supposedly hidden, with quantities so large they seem impossible. The scroll dates to approximately 50–100 CE, roughly the same period as the other Dead Sea Scrolls. It was discovered in Cave 3 at Qumran in 1952, but its unusual material, copper rather than parchment, meant it couldn't be unrolled without breaking. It took 4 years before a method was developed to carefully cut the scroll into strips, allowing the text to be read without destroying it completely. What that text revealed was startling and remains controversial. The scroll lists treasures in a formulaic style, a location description, then the type and quantity of treasure hidden there. For example, in the ruins of the Valley of Achor, under the steps that go eastward, 40 talents of silver, or, in the cistern at the foot of the stairs, 65 bars of gold. Location after location, treasure after treasure, with quantities that boggle the mind. The total amounts described are staggering. Tons of gold and silver, far more than the temple in Jerusalem was supposed to possess, more wealth than seems plausible for any single institution to have accumulated and hidden. Some entries describe hundreds of talents of precious metals. Ancient talents varied in weight, but even conservative estimates would make the total treasure worth billions in modern currency. Is this a genuine inventory of hidden treasure? Or is it a myth, a legend written down as if factual? Or perhaps a literary work, a fictional treasure fantasy? Or could it be some kind of code, with the treasures representing something else entirely? Scholars have debated these questions since the scroll was first read, and no consensus has emerged. If genuine, whose treasure was it? The most common theory is that it represents the treasury of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, hidden before the Roman destruction of the city in 70 CE. The temple was enormously wealthy, receiving contributions from Jewish communities across the ancient world. As Roman forces approached Jerusalem, temple officials might have hidden the treasury to prevent it from being captured. The Copper Scroll would be their record of where everything was hidden. But there are problems with this theory. The amounts seem too large even for the temple treasury. No historical sources mention the hiding of temple treasures, though. Such an enormous operation would have required many people, and probably couldn't have been kept secret. And if this was an official temple record, why was it on copper in a cave at Qumran rather than with temple officials who might use it to recover the treasure? An alternative theory suggests the scroll relates to the Qumran community itself, a religious sect, possibly Essenes, who lived near where the scroll was found. Perhaps they accumulated substantial wealth through donations or trade and hid it when the community was threatened. The scroll would be their inventory, but this seems unlikely. The Qumran community appears to have been relatively poor, living simply, unlikely to possess such enormous wealth. Some scholars argue the scroll is purely fictional, perhaps related to Jewish folklore about hidden treasures. There are rabbinic texts that mention legendary hidden treasures, sacred vessels from the First Temple, hidden before the Babylonian conquest. Perhaps the Copper Scroll is a written version of such legends, never meant to be taken as factual inventory. The use of copper rather than parchment might indicate special status, a more permanent record of important, even if mythical, information. Others have proposed the scroll is written in code, that the treasures are metaphorical references to something else, sacred texts, spiritual knowledge, or coded references to people or groups. But attempts to decode it as allegory have been unconvincing. The text reads straightforwardly as a list of hidden valuables. If it's code, it's very convincing code. Over the years, various treasure hunters and researchers have attempted to locate the sites described in the scroll. None have found any treasure. This isn't surprising. The locations described are often vague or use place names that can't be definitively identified with modern locations. 2,000 years of development, erosion, and landscape change have made recovery extraordinarily difficult, even if the treasures existed. Some claimed locations have been excavated archaeologically. Nothing matching the scroll's descriptions has been found. But treasure hunters argue this doesn't prove anything. The treasures might have been recovered shortly after they were hidden, or they might lie in locations we haven't correctly identified, or deeper than excavations have reached. The absence of recovered treasure doesn't definitively prove the scroll is fictional, though it certainly raises doubts about its reliability as a treasure map. The language of the scroll is unusual, a dialect of Hebrew not quite matching other known texts, with some Greek loanwords and possibly cryptic or abbreviated forms. This has made translation challenging. Different scholars render some passages differently, changing the location descriptions in ways that might be significant for anyone attempting to find the treasures. Why was it written on copper? This is expensive and difficult. Inscribing text on metal is much more laborious than writing on parchment. Copper was chosen for permanence, presumably. Parchment degrades over centuries, but copper endures. Whoever created this scroll intended it to last, suggesting they believed the information was important and that it might be needed long in the future. But if it was meant to be used, why was it left in a cave? Why not keep it with the people who might need to recover the treasure? Perhaps it was hidden for safety, to be retrieved when needed. Perhaps it was a backup copy, with other copies held by people who might use them. Perhaps the plan to recover it failed. The people who knew where it was hidden died, and it was never retrieved. Imagine yourself as a temple official in Jerusalem around 68 CE. Roman legions are approaching. The city is under siege. You know the temple will fall. It's only a question of when. The treasury must be hidden, preserved for a future when it might be recovered and used to rebuild. You organize teams to secretly transport the temple's wealth to various locations around Judea. Caves, cisterns, ruins, places where it can be concealed. As each hiding place is used, you record the location and the amount hidden. You work carefully, describing each site in terms that others familiar with the area will understand. The inventory grows, 64 locations, enormous quantities of precious metals and sacred objects all hidden away. You have the list inscribed on copper, permanent, durable, able to survive buried underground for decades or centuries if necessary. You hide the copper scroll in a cave near Qumran, perhaps along with other important documents. You intend to survive the war, to return and use the scroll to recover the treasure, but you die in the siege, or are captured and killed, or flee and never return. The scroll remains hidden, its information unused, the treasures never recovered. Or perhaps the treasure never existed, and you were recording legends, preparing a document for purposes we don't understand. As sleep approaches, picture that scroll as it was found, rolled up in its cave, the copper green with age but the text still legible after 2,000 years. Picture the moment when it was cut open and the inventory revealed. The excitement of discovering what seemed to be a genuine ancient treasure map. Picture treasure hunters over the decades since, digging in various locations, finding nothing, debating whether the scroll is real or fantasy. The copper scroll remains enigmatic. We have the text, translated and analysed by numerous scholars. We can read what it says, lists of locations and treasures, but we don't know if it's true or false, whether it records real hidden wealth or mythical treasures, or something else entirely. The scroll itself is real, undeniably ancient, inscribed on copper and hidden in a cave. But what it describes, and whether those descriptions correspond to any reality, remains mysterious. Another ancient document whose meaning we cannot fully decode despite being able to read every word. The Georgia Guidestones, modern monument, ancient mystery. In 1979, in Elbert County, Georgia, a mysterious monument was erected. The Georgia Guidestones consisted of 6 granite slabs, 4 standing upright in a cluster, with one capstone across the top and another slab at ground level serving as foundation. Inscribed on the stones in 8 modern languages were 10 guidelines or commandments, statements about maintaining humanity's relationship with nature and each other. The monument was commissioned by an unknown person or group using the pseudonym R.C. Christian, and built by a local granite company who signed agreements never to reveal their client's identity. In 2022, the monument was partially destroyed by an explosion and subsequently demolished completely for safety reasons. But for over 40 years, it stood as one of the most mysterious monuments in America, modern in construction but ancient in inspiration, clearly meant to endure for millennia, built by unknown sponsors for unknown purposes. The Guidestones are relevant to our survey of archaeological mysteries not because they're ancient, they're not, but because they were explicitly designed to be a mystery to future archaeologists. The sponsors imagined a post-apocalyptic future where current civilization had collapsed. and the stones would serve as guidelines for survivors rebuilding humanity. They're a deliberately created artifact meant to puzzle future excavators, a modern simulation of the kind of mysterious ancient monuments we've been examining. The 10 guidelines inscribed on the stones were controversial. They advocated maintaining humanity's population under 500 million in balance with nature, guiding reproduction wisely, uniting humanity with a living new language, ruling with reason and justice, and other principles that struck some as wise environmental ethics and others as sinister elite agendas. The first guideline, maintaining population under 500 million when current population is over 7 billion, particularly sparked conspiracy theories about depopulation plans. But our interest here is not the content of the guidelines, but the mystery of the monument's creation. Who built it? Why? What did they hope to accomplish? The story as we know it involves a well-dressed man appearing at the Elbert Granite Finishing Company in June 1979, introducing himself as Robert C. Christian, and explaining he represented a group who wished to erect a monument to conservation and reason. He presented detailed specifications, the monument's design, dimensions, the inscriptions in multiple languages, astronomical alignments built into the structure. The Granite Company president Joe Fendley initially dismissed the proposal as too expensive and complex. But Christian was persistent, eventually convincing Fendley to provide a quote. When the quote came to a substantial sum, Christian agreed without hesitation, arranging for funds to be transferred through a local banker, Wyatt Martin. Martin served as intermediary, meeting with Christian and handling financial transactions, but was sworn to secrecy about Christian's true identity. Martin has kept that secret, even after the monument's destruction. He maintains that Christian was a pseudonym, that the sponsoring group had legitimate reasons for anonymity, and that revealing their identity would serve no purpose. This steadfast secrecy has fueled decades of speculation. Who were these people? Why the anonymity? What agenda did they have? The monument was designed with astronomical features, a hole drilled through the center stone aligned with the North Star, allowing observers to track its position, a slot cut through another stone aligned with the sun's solstices and equinoxes. The capstone had a small hole that allowed a beam of sunlight to shine through at noon each day, illuminating the date on a center stone. These features gave the monument astronomical and calendrical functions, similar to ancient megalithic structures. The choice of languages was deliberate: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, representing major language families and geopolitical blocs. An additional inscription in older languages, Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphics, appeared on the sides of the capstone, explaining the monument's purpose and the astronomical features. The overall design evoked megalithic monuments like Stonehenge, massive stones carefully placed, astronomical alignments, inscriptions in multiple languages, clearly meant to endure. The creators were explicitly attempting to build something that would last thousands of years, that would communicate across time even if modern languages and cultures disappeared. This is fascinating from an archaeological perspective because it represents a thought experiment. What would we build if we wanted to communicate with distant future peoples? What messages would we send? How would we ensure they could be read and understood? The Georgia Guidestones represent one group's answer to these questions. Messages about ethics and sustainability, encoded in multiple languages, built into a structure designed to survive. The monument's destruction in 2022 adds another layer to its mystery. An explosive device detonated early one morning, destroying one of the main stones. Surveillance footage showed a figure approaching the monument shortly before the explosion, but no one has been identified or charged. Shortly after, authorities demolished the remaining structure, citing safety concerns. The monument that was meant to last for millennia survived only 43 years. Who destroyed it, and why? Was it ideological opposition to the monument's messages? Random vandalism? The mystery of the monument's destruction compounds the mystery of its creation. Born in mystery, it died in mystery, never serving the purpose its creators intended because it was destroyed long before any apocalypse that might have made it relevant. Imagine yourself in that distant future the creators envisioned. Civilization has collapsed, technology lost, population drastically reduced. You're part of a rebuilding society scavenging knowledge from the ruins of the past. You come upon these standing stones, covered with inscriptions in languages you don't recognize, except perhaps fragments. What do you make of them? You can see they're deliberately constructed, not natural formations. The astronomical alignments might be recognizable if you've developed basic astronomy. But the messages, can you read them? Do any of the languages survive in forms you recognize? Even if you can puzzle out some words, do you understand the context? What does guide reproduction wisely mean without understanding 20th century population dynamics and environmental concerns? The Georgia Guidestones demonstrate a paradox of trying to communicate across time. You can build a durable structure, but the cultural context that makes messages meaningful may not survive. Ancient monuments puzzle us not because we can't see them, but because we can't fully understand the minds and cultures that created them. The Guidestones' creators tried to be clear and universal, but their messages were still products of a specific time and perspective. The anonymity of the sponsors adds another dimension. Ancient monuments are also often anonymous. We don't know the names of the people who commissioned or built most megalithic structures. They were important to their cultures, but their individual identities weren't preserved or weren't considered important by later generations. The Guidestones' sponsors chose anonymity deliberately, perhaps understanding that messages should stand on their own merit rather than on the authority of their source. As you rest here, breathing slowly, consider what the Georgia Guidestones teach us about ancient mysteries. They show us how easy it is to create mystery through anonymity and ambiguous messages. They demonstrate that even modern, well-documented construction can spawn elaborate conspiracy theories. They prove that monuments can be enigmatic to contemporaries, not just to distant descendants. The Guidestones puzzled people from the moment they were erected. They also show how quickly things can be lost, built to last millennia, destroyed within decades. How many ancient monuments met similar fates? How many were destroyed by people who opposed their messages or found them threatening? How much ancient knowledge was deliberately destroyed rather than naturally lost? The Georgia Guidestones are gone now, reduced to rubble, hauled away. What remains are photographs, videos, the memories of people who visited them, scholarly analyses, and persistent questions about who built them and why. In a way, they've become what they were meant to simulate, a mysterious monument whose full story is unknown, whose creators are anonymous, whose purpose can only be inferred from what they left behind. The irony is that the Guidestones became more mysterious through their destruction. Had they stood for centuries, perhaps eventually the sponsors' identities would have been revealed, the full story told. But the explosion ensured the mystery would never be completely solved, that speculation would continue indefinitely. The monument that was meant to guide future humanity couldn't even survive the present one. The Olmec heads, faces from the past. In the jungles of southern Mexico, in what was once the heartland of the Olmec civilization, sit massive stone heads carved from single blocks of basalt. These heads are enormous, up to 3.4 meters tall and weighing as much as 50 tons. They depict individual faces with distinct features, clearly portraiture rather than idealized or generic representations. There are 17 known heads, all carved between 1500 and 400 BCE, making them among the oldest monumental sculptures in Mesoamerica. Their creation, transportation, and purpose remain subjects of fascination and debate. The Olmec civilization is often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, flourishing in Mexico's Gulf Coast region before the Maya, Aztec, or other later civilizations. They developed complex society, monumental architecture, a calendar system, and a sophisticated artistic tradition. The colossal heads are their most famous legacy, but they also created jade carvings, earthen platforms and pyramids, and other stone sculptures. Each head is unique, with different facial features, expressions, and headdresses. This strongly suggests they're portraits of specific individuals, probably rulers or important leaders. The detail in the faces is remarkable. Individual features like nose shape, lip fullness, ear configuration are carefully rendered. These were real people, their likenesses preserved in stone, staring across millennia with expressions that can still be read as serious, proud, contemplative. The logistics of creating these heads are challenging to understand. The basalt they're carved from doesn't occur naturally where the heads are located. The stone was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, up to 100 kilometers away. Blocks weighing 50 tons had to be transported across this distance, through jungle terrain that includes rivers, swamps and mountains. How did the Olmec accomplish this without wheeled vehicles, without draft animals, without metal tools? The conventional explanation involves massive labour investment. The stone blocks were probably moved on wooden rollers or sledges, pulled by hundreds of workers. Rivers might have been used when possible, with the stones loaded onto large rafts. The journey might have taken months, with workers clearing paths, building temporary bridges or causeways, establishing camps. The effort required would be extraordinary, but not impossible for a well-organised society. But questions remain. How did they load 50-ton stones onto rafts without modern lifting equipment? How did they prevent rafts from sinking or capsizing? How did they extract such large blocks from the quarry without metal tools? Bronze and iron tools can quarry stone, but the Olmec worked in stone without metal. They had stone tools, wooden wedges and patience. But the scale of the blocks challenges our understanding of what's possible with these limitations. Once transported to their destinations, the blocks had to be carved. The Olmec sculptors had no metal chisels, no power tools, no modern abrasives. They worked with stone tools, using harder stones to shape the softer basalt, grinding and pecking away material over months or years until the portrait emerged. The precision they achieved, the symmetry of features, the rendering of subtle details like eyelids and lips, testifies to extraordinary skill and patience. Some researchers have noted that the faces have features that some interpret as African rather than indigenous American. This has spawned theories about transatlantic contact, about ancient Africans reaching Mexico thousands of years ago, leaving their genetic legacy in the Olmec population. These theories are not supported by genetic evidence or mainstream archaeology, but they persist in alternative historical circles. The facial features are better explained as variation within indigenous American populations. Human faces are diverse. Some Olmec people might have had features, full lips, broad noses, that superficially resemble typical African features. But this doesn't require African ancestry. It's simply human diversity. The Olmec carved the faces of their own rulers and leaders, people who were genetically indigenous Americans, not African visitors. What makes the heads mysterious is not their facial features but their purpose and symbolism. Why carve such enormous monuments to specific individuals? What did these portraits mean to the Olmec? Were they meant to honour rulers during their lifetimes? To commemorate them after death? To assert territorial control or political authority? To serve religious or ritual functions? All 17 heads were found at major Olmec sites: San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cubata. They were clearly important, placed prominently, probably maintained and perhaps ritually used. But we don't have Olmec texts explaining their significance. The Olmec writing system, if they had one, hasn't been deciphered. We must infer purpose from archaeological context and ethnographic parallels, which provide possibilities but not certainties. The heads were sometimes intentionally buried or defaced in antiquity. Some show evidence of having been deliberately toppled, rolled into pits, or mutilated. This might represent ritual closure when a ruler died or was deposed, or it might indicate conquest, with victors defacing monuments of defeated rivals. These acts of burial or defacement add layers to the mystery. The heads were important enough to create, but also important enough to deliberately destroy or hide. Modern treatment of the heads has sometimes been problematic. Some were moved from their original locations to museums or town squares, destroying archaeological context. This displacement makes it harder to understand how the heads related to other structures and features at Olmec sites. It's another reminder that archaeology is as much about context as objects. Knowing where something was found and what it was found with is often as important as the object itself. Imagine yourself as an Olmec sculptor, perhaps 2800 years ago. You've been commissioned to carve the portrait of your ruler into one of the enormous basalt blocks that has just arrived after months of transport from the distant mountains. You study the ruler's face, memorizing every detail. You understand the importance of this work. It will outlast the ruler's lifetime, will stand as testament to his power and your skill. You begin work with your stone tools, carefully marking out the basic form. The work is slow. Days become weeks, weeks become months. Gradually the face emerges from the rough stone, the shape of the skull, the features of the face, the elaborate headdress. You work from all angles, checking proportions, refining details. The ruler visits occasionally to see your progress, to ensure his likeness is being captured accurately. Finally, after perhaps a year of sustained effort, the portrait is complete. It's installed at the centre of your city, a monument to the ruler's greatness, a demonstration of your society's capability and organisation. You feel pride in your work, knowing it will endure long after both you and the ruler are gone. And you're right, nearly 3,000 years later, that face still stares out from the stone, your skill still evident in every carefully carved feature. The Olmec heads are often compared to other colossal portraits from ancient cultures, the Egyptian Sphinx, Easter Island Moai, Bamiyan Buddhas. Across cultures and continents, humans have carved enormous monuments to individuals or deities. The impulse seems universal, to create something larger than life, to preserve faces and forms in materials that endure, to demonstrate capability through monumental works. But each culture's approach is unique. The Olmec heads are not stylized or abstract, but realistically individual. They don't depict gods or mythical beings, but actual people. They're not decorative additions to larger structures, but stand alone as complete works. These choices tell us something about Olmec values. They honoured specific individuals, valued realistic representation, and saw monumental sculpture as sufficient in itself without needing to be part of temples or palaces. As you drift towards sleep, picture those heads as they sit today in museums and archaeological parks, visitors pausing before them to photograph and wonder. Picture them as they were when new, stone fresh cut, features sharp, perhaps painted in colours now long faded, standing at the centres of Olmec cities. Picture the rulers they depict, alive and powerful, making decisions that shaped their society, unaware that only their stone faces would be remembered when their names and deeds were forgotten. The Olmec heads are mysterious not because we can't understand them, but because our understanding is incomplete. We know they're portraits. We know they required enormous effort to create. We know they were important to Olmec society. What we don't fully know is the specific cultural meanings they carried, the rituals associated with them, the stories the Olmec told about them. The faces remain, expressions readable across millennia, but the full context of their significance is lost, leaving them powerful but partially enigmatic presences from America's ancient past. The cairn of Bar Nenez, Europe's oldest building. On the northern coast of Brittany and France, overlooking the Bay of Morlaix, stands a massive structure that predates the Egyptian pyramids by over 1,000 years. The cairn of Bar Nenez is a megalithic monument consisting of two stepped pyramids connected together, built from massive stone blocks arranged into chambers and passages. Dating to approximately 4,150 BCE, it's among the oldest architectural structures in the world, built by Neolithic peoples who left no written records, no clear indication of why they invested such enormous effort in its construction. The monument is immense, 72 metres long, 20-25 metres wide, and up to 9 metres high. It contains 11 passage chambers, each accessed through a separate entrance. The chambers were built at different times, with the primary cairn constructed around 4850 BCE and secondary additions around 4250 BCE. This means the site was used and modified over at least 600 years, spanning numerous generations of builders. The construction used local materials, granite from a quarry about 2 kilometres away, dolerite from even farther. The stones are not dressed or shaped to fit precisely, but they are arranged with care, creating walls that have stood for nearly 7,000 years. The chambers are corbel vaulted, with stones stacked in overlapping courses that gradually close toward the top, creating a stable roof without true arches. Some passages are nearly 15 metres long, requiring you to crawl or crouch to navigate them. Inside one chamber, carved into the stone walls, are mysterious symbols, a series of U-shaped marks, zigzag patterns, and what might be representations of bows or tools. These carvings are among the oldest architectural decorations in Europe, created by people who lived thousands of years before writing was invented in this region. The symbols' meanings are unknown, though various interpretations have been proposed. They might be maps, calendars, religious symbols, or simply decorative patterns. The purpose of Bar Nenez is uncertain, but likely funerary. Similar Neolithic monuments in the region are known to have been used as tombs, places where communities deposited their dead over generations. The multiple chambers at Bar Nenez might correspond to different families or lineages, each maintaining their own burial space within the communal monument. but no human remains have been found at Barnenez, leading to debate about whether it was ever actually used for burials or served some other function. The absence of remains might be explained by the monument's history. In the 1950s, the site was being quarried for road building material before archaeologists recognised its significance and stopped the destruction. Much of the monument was damaged or removed before protection began. It's possible that burial remains were destroyed during this period, or they might have been removed in earlier centuries by looters or farmers. What makes Barnenez particularly mysterious is its age. When it was built, agriculture was just beginning to be established in this region. The builders were among the first farmers in Brittany, transitioning from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural communities. The Neolithic Revolution, the transformation from hunting and gathering to farming and animal domestication, was still in progress. Why would these early farmers invest so much effort in constructing a monument? Building Barnene required quarrying and transporting thousands of tons of stone, organising substantial labour forces, sustaining the effort over years or decades. For communities that were still establishing agricultural systems, still learning which crops grew best in this climate, still vulnerable to harvest failures and food shortages, this was an enormous investment of resources and labour. The standard archaeological explanation is that monuments like Barnenez served to create and reinforce social cohesion. Building together created community identity, distinguished us from neighbouring groups. The completed monument served as a focal point for community rituals, a place where ancestors were honoured, a physical manifestation of social continuity across generations. The very effort required to build it helped bind the community together through shared purpose and achievement. But this explanation, while plausible, doesn't fully capture the mystery. There are simpler ways to create community identity and honour ancestors. Why specifically create massive stone monuments? What made this particular form compelling to Neolithic peoples not just in Brittany, but across Atlantic Europe, from Portugal to Scotland, where similar megalithic tombs appeared during roughly the same period? Perhaps the answer lies in the deep past, in traditions that preceded agriculture. Some researchers have proposed that megalithic monuments represent continuity of ritual practices from hunter-gatherer times, sacred sites that were maintained and elaborated even as the economy shifted to farming. The practice of creating special places for the dead, marking them with stones, might extend far back into prehistory, with monuments like Barnenez representing elaborations of much older traditions. The monument's coastal locations are notable. Many Neolithic megalithic sites in Atlantic Europe are near the coast, often with commanding views of the sea. Was this practical, coastal areas being among the first to be settled by early farmers, or did it have deeper meaning, with the sea itself being ritually significant? Ancient peoples who lived by the ocean certainly saw it as powerful, mysterious, a source of food, but also of danger, a boundary between known and unknown worlds. Imagine yourself as part of a Neolithic community in Brittany, perhaps 600 to 800 years ago. You and your people have been farming this land for a few generations. Life is hard but stable. You grow wheat and barley, raise cattle and pigs. You remember stories from elders about the old times when your ancestors hunted and gathered, moving with the seasons. Now you stay in one place, tending your fields. Your community decides to build a monument, a great cairn where your ancestors can rest, where rituals can be performed, where your community's permanence in this landscape will be marked in stone. You participate in the work, quarrying stones, dragging them to the site, fitting them into place. The work takes years. Many people contribute labour, taking turns between agricultural seasons when time is available. As the monument grows, you feel pride. This is your community's work, something that will outlast all of you, a statement in stone that your people belong here, that this is your place. When elders die, they are laid to rest in the cairn's chambers, their bones joining those of earlier generations. The monument becomes a sacred space, a link between past and present, between the living and the dead. You don't know that thousands of years in the future, people will study this monument, will wonder why it was built, will debate its purpose and significance. To you, its purpose is obvious. It's where ancestors rest, where the community gathers for important rituals, where the boundary between ordinary life and sacred death is marked and maintained. It's as natural and necessary as planting crops or tending animals. The cairn of Barnenez was nearly destroyed in the 1950s, a close call that highlights how many ancient monuments have been lost to development, quarrying, or simple neglect. We're fortunate that this one survived, that its significance was recognised in time. But how many similar structures were destroyed before modern archaeology developed? How many megalithic tombs were dismantled for building stone, or ploughed under for fields, or simply collapsed and forgotten? As you rest here, breathing deeply, picture that monument as it stands today, partially reconstructed, protected, open to visitors who walk through passages that haven't seen sunlight in millennia. Picture it as it was when new, when the stone was fresh cut, when the community that built it still lived nearby, still used it for purposes we can only dimly reconstruct from archaeological evidence. The cairn of Barnenair reminds us that sophisticated architecture predates civilization as we usually define it. Before cities, before writing, before the great empires of antiquity, Neolithic peoples were creating monuments that required planning, organisation, sustained effort, and architectural knowledge. They had reasons for building that made sense to them, that justified the enormous investment, that bound their communities together. We can study their monuments, admire their skill, but we cannot fully recover the cultural meanings that made this labour worthwhile, that transformed piles of stone into sacred spaces whose significance persisted across generations. The underwater ruins of India, submerged cities. Off the coast of Gujarat in western India, underwater surveys have revealed structures that some researchers believe are the remains of ancient cities submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. The Gulf of Kambat, formerly known as the Gulf of Cambay, has been the focus of particularly controversial discoveries. Sonar surveys showing what appear to be geometric patterns, walls, foundations, and other features at depths of 20 to 40 metres below the surface. If these are genuine ruins, they could date back 9,000, 10,000 years, making them among the oldest urban settlements ever discovered. The discoveries began in 2001 when the National Institute of Ocean Technology, conducting routine pollution surveys, detected unusual formations on the seafloor. Follow-up surveys with side-scan sonar revealed linear and rectangular features extending over an area of several square kilometres. The pattern suggested urban planning, parallel walls, grid layouts, structures oriented to cardinal directions. Subsequent expeditions recovered artefacts including pottery, tools, wood fragments, and human remains, some of which yielded radiocarbon dates of 9,000, 10,000 years. These finds sparked controversy immediately. If genuine, they would dramatically revise our understanding of Indian history. Conventional archaeology holds that the Indus Valley civilization, flourishing around 2600–1900 BCE, represents the earliest urban culture in India. Evidence of urban settlements thousands of years earlier would suggest a much longer, more complex trajectory of Indian civilization, with earlier phases now lost beneath rising seas. Skeptics point to numerous problems with the Kambat claims. The sonar images are ambiguous. What appear to be walls or structures could equally be natural geological formations, bedrock features, or even modern debris. The Gulf of Kambat has strong tidal currents that deposit sediments in linear patterns that can resemble artificial structures on sonar. The recovered artifacts, while genuinely ancient, might have been deposited naturally by rivers flowing into the Gulf over thousands of years rather than representing in situ urban remains. The radiocarbon dates are particularly problematic. Wood fragments dating to 9,000 years ago don't necessarily prove that structures of that age exist. Wood of that age could have been carried into the Gulf by rivers, deposited naturally without any connection to human settlements. Dating the artifacts doesn't date the supposed structures, unless the artifacts are found in clear association with architectural remains. Multiple expeditions have attempted to verify the findings through underwater archaeology. Results have been inconclusive. The water visibility in the Gulf of Kambat is extremely poor, often less than a metre, making underwater photography and detailed examination nearly impossible. The strong currents and soft sediments make excavation challenging. Despite years of effort, no clear, unambiguous architectural remains have been documented in ways that satisfy skeptical archaeologists. Yet the possibility remains tantalising. At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000, 12,000 years ago, sea levels were about 120 metres lower than today. What is now the Gulf of Kambat would have been dry land, part of a river valley with fresh water flowing to a distant coast. This would have been prime territory for human settlement, fertile river valleys with abundant resources. If settlements existed there, they would now be submerged. This pattern holds worldwide. Much of what was prime coastal and river valley land during the Ice Age is now underwater. Global sea level rise of 120 metres inundated millions of square kilometres of land where humans likely lived. Any settlements, monuments or cities that existed in these areas are now submerged, difficult to find and study. The underwater archaeological record is vast but largely unexplored. India has other submerged sites that are less controversial. Near Mahabalipuram on the southeast coast, divers have documented submerged rock formations that show possible tool marks and architectural features. Local legends speak of 7 pagodas, only one of which, the Shore Temple, remains above water, with 6 others supposedly submerged. While these legends are probably exaggerated or mythical, some underwater features near Mahabalipuram do suggest human modification, though dating and interpretation remain uncertain. Near Dwarka in Gujarat, underwater archaeology has documented structures that appear to be parts of an ancient port or city, though dating them precisely is difficult. Some researchers link these to ancient Dwarka, a city mentioned in Hindu texts like the Mahabharata. According to legend, Krishna's city of Dwarka was swallowed by the sea after his death. Archaeological evidence of a submerged city in approximately the right location is intriguing, though establishing definitive connections between archaeological remains and legendary cities is problematic. The possibility of very ancient submerged cities has fueled alternative historical theories. Some propose that advanced civilizations existed before recorded history, flourished during the Ice Age when coastlines were different and were destroyed or disrupted by post-glacial flooding. These theories posit that much of human history has been lost beneath rising seas, that our understanding of civilization's origins is incomplete because we've only studied sites that remained above water. Mainstream archaeology is skeptical. While acknowledging that sea level rise submerged significant areas, archaeologists note that we have extensive evidence of human occupation from the Ice Age period. Hunter-gatherer camps, tools, art, and other traces exist worldwide from this period, but there's no clear evidence of urban civilization or advanced technology from times before conventional chronologies propose. The alternative theories require us to accept that an advanced civilization left no trace except in legend and ambiguous underwater features. Yet the question remains, how thoroughly have we searched? Underwater archaeology is expensive, technically challenging, and limited in scope. Most of the submerged continental shelves haven't been systematically surveyed for archaeological remains. It's possible, not proven, but possible, that significant discoveries await in areas we haven't yet explored. Imagine yourself in that distant past, perhaps 11,000 years ago, living in a settlement in what is now the Gulf of Kumbat, but was then a river valley far from the sea. Your people have lived here for generations. You hunt, gather, and perhaps practice early forms of agriculture. Your settlement consists of structures, whether simple huts or something more elaborate, we can only speculate. Then the sea begins to rise. It's slow, perhaps a few meters per century, imperceptible in a single lifetime but inexorable across generations. Your ancestors lived far from the coast. Your grandparents saw the sea at a certain distance. Now it's closer. In your children's time, it will be closer still. Eventually the sea will claim your settlement. Your descendants will retreat inland, carrying what they can, abandoning structures they cannot move. The rising seas erase your settlement from the landscape. It becomes submerged, buried under sediments, forgotten. Thousands of years later, it might be detected by sonar, misidentified as geological features, or correctly identified but impossible to excavate due to technical challenges. Your existence becomes a matter of debate, your life questioned by scholars who can't definitively prove you existed in this now submerged place. As sleep approaches, as consciousness fades, picture those vast expanses of submerged land around the world's coasts. Picture the settlements, camps, monuments that might lie beneath mud and water, unexplored and unknown. Picture the histories that might be hidden there, waiting to be discovered or forever lost if we never develop the technology and commitment to thoroughly explore the underwater archaeological record. The submerged sites of India remain mysteries, genuine ancient remains or natural features misinterpreted as artificial. advanced urban centres or simple settlements exaggerated by enthusiastic proponents? The evidence is ambiguous, the interpretations contested. But the questions raised are important regardless. How much of human history is hidden beneath the seas? What settlements, cultures and achievements were erased by post-glacial flooding? How does our understanding of human history need to be revised if significant portions of the archaeological record are submerged and unexplored? These questions have no definitive answers yet. The underwater sites of India, whether they ultimately prove to be ancient cities or natural formations, remind us that the archaeological record is incomplete, that significant discoveries may await in environments we've only begun to explore, and that our narratives about human history should remain provisional, open to revision as new evidence emerges from unexpected places, including the depths of the oceans that cover most of our planet's surface. The Rongorongo script, Easter Island's unread tablets. On Easter Island, that remote speck in the Pacific Ocean famous for its enigmatic moai statues, a few wooden tablets survive bearing inscriptions in a script that no one can read. Rongorongo, as the script is called, consists of glyphs, stylized representations of humans, animals, plants, geometric shapes and abstract symbols, arranged in neat lines across wooden boards. Only about 24 tablets exist, most collected in the 19th century by European visitors. Despite decades of study, the script remains largely undeciphered, its language unknown, its purpose mysterious. The tablets are written in a unique style called reverse baustrophodon. The lines alternate direction, with one line read left to right, the next right to left, and each line inverted 180 degrees from the one above it. To read the tablet, you would read the first line normally, then rotate the tablet 180 degrees to read the second line, rotate again for the third line, and so on. This unusual format is found in no other writing system, suggesting the Rongorongo script developed independently on Easter Island, rather than being borrowed from elsewhere. The glyphs themselves are beautifully executed, carefully carved into wooden boards using shark teeth or volcanic glass. The level of craftsmanship suggests a developed tradition, scribes who were trained in creating these texts. The glyphs are complex, with over 600 distinct forms identified across all surviving tablets. Some glyphs are clearly representational. You can recognize human figures, birds, fish, plants. Others are more abstract, their meanings opaque. What makes Rongorongo particularly tragic is that we nearly had the key to translating it. When European missionaries arrived on Easter Island in the 1860s, some islanders could still read the script. But the missionaries, believing the tablets represented pagan religion, actively discouraged their use and in some cases destroyed tablets. By the time scholars recognized the script's importance and tried to record the knowledge of how to read it, only a few elderly islanders remained who had any familiarity with Rongorongo, and their knowledge was fragmentary. One attempt to record the script's reading was made in 1886, when a Tahitian islander of Easter Island descent named Matoro was asked to read several tablets. He provided interpretations naming various things depicted by the glyphs: bird, fish, man, moon, and so on. But scholars debate whether Matoro was actually reading the text or simply describing what the pictures looked like. His interpretations don't follow consistent patterns that would suggest he was decoding a genuine writing system. The fundamental question about Rongorongo is whether it's true writing or something else. True writing represents language, specific words and grammatical structures that can be read the same way by different people who know the system. Pseudo-writing looks like writing but doesn't encode language, instead serving as memory aids or decorative symbols whose meaning is more fluid. Rongorongo might be either. Some researchers believe Rongorongo is genuine writing, possibly representing the Rapa Nui language spoken on Easter Island. Statistical analysis of glyph sequences has identified patterns that might represent grammar or syntax. Some sequences repeat across different tablets in ways that could indicate standardized phrases or formal structures. If it's true writing, then the tablets presumably record important information: myths, genealogies, histories, rituals, or other culturally significant content. Others argue Rongorongo is proto-writing or a memory system rather than full writing. The tablets might serve as mnemonic devices, helping trained reciters remember long oral texts without fully encoding those texts the way true writing does. In this interpretation, The glyphs prompt memory of stories or chants rather than representing specific words. Different reciters might describe the same glyph sequence with different words while conveying the same general meaning. The content of the tablets, if they could be read, might help resolve debates about Easter Island's history. The island is famous for its moai statues and for the ecological and social collapse that occurred sometime around 1500–1800 CE. Easter Island's forests were completely destroyed, leading to soil erosion, loss of resources, and eventually population decline and social conflict. The Rongorongo tablets might record histories, myths, or other information that would clarify what happened and when. But we may never know. The tablets are fragile, wooden artifacts from a humid tropical environment. Many have degraded over the centuries, some were lost or destroyed. The few that survive are jealously guarded by museums and institutions, making comprehensive study difficult. And without a bilingual text, something written in both Rongorongo and a known language, decipherment may be impossible. The bilingual approach worked for Egyptian hieroglyphics with the Rosetta Stone, which had the same text in hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Greek. The Greek could be read, providing the key to decoding the Egyptian scripts. For Rongorongo, no such parallel text exists. Without it, scholars must rely on statistical analysis, comparison of glyph sequences, and attempts to identify patterns that might represent grammatical structures. Progress has been minimal. One tablet, the Santiago staff, is particularly puzzling. It's a ceremonial staff covered with Rongorongo glyphs, but some of the symbols don't appear on any other tablet. This raises questions about whether there were multiple versions or dialects of Rongorongo, or whether the staff represents a different script entirely, or whether some glyphs were created for specific contexts rather than being part of a standard writing system. The lunar calendar is one element that has been partially decoded. Some sequences of glyphs appear to represent moon phases or calendrical information. This suggests the tablets might include astronomical or calendrical content, though we can't be sure what the broader context of such information might be, whether it's part of ritual texts, agricultural calendars, or historical chronologies. Imagine yourself as a Rongorongo scribe on Easter Island, perhaps 300 years ago. You're one of the few people trained in this sacred art, learning the glyphs from your master over years of apprenticeship. The wooden tablets you create are important, containing knowledge that must be preserved, genealogies of chiefly lines, ritual chants for ceremonies, creation myths, perhaps astronomical knowledge used for navigation or calendar keeping. You carefully carve each glyph into the wood, your shark-tooth tool moving with practiced precision. Each symbol is meaningful to you. You know what it represents, how it relates to the other glyphs around it, what words or concepts it encodes. The tablets you create will be treasured, kept in special houses, consulted during important ceremonies. They are repositories of your culture's knowledge, physical manifestations of traditions passed down through generations. You cannot know that within a century your traditions will be disrupted by European contact, that diseases will decimate the population, that missionaries will discourage the use of these tablets, that the knowledge of how to read them will die with the last generation of trained scribes. You cannot imagine that centuries in the future, scholars will puzzle over your carefully carved glyphs, unable to read them, debating whether they're true writing or something else, your cultural heritage reduced to undecipherable symbols. The loss of Rongorongo is a stark reminder of how quickly cultural knowledge can disappear. When oral traditions are disrupted, when scribal traditions are abandoned, when the last people who hold certain knowledge die without passing it on, that knowledge is lost. Sometimes permanently. The Rongorongo tablets survive as objects, but their meaning is largely gone, locked away in glyphs no one can fully read. This happens more than we might think. Around the world, languages die. The last speaker passes away, and with them goes a unique way of expressing and organizing human experience. Writing systems are forgotten. The last person who can read an ancient script dies, and the texts become decorative marks rather than repositories of meaning. Cultural practices end, the last practitioners pass on, and traditions that sustained communities for generations fade into memory and eventually into nothing. Easter Island's isolation makes its cultural loss particularly complete. On continents, knowledge can be reconstructed through comparison with related cultures, languages and practices, but Easter Island was remote, its language and culture unique. When knowledge was lost there were no nearby relatives to fill in gaps, no related traditions to provide context. The loss was absolute. As you rest here, breathing slowly, picture those tablets in museum cases, their glyphs still visible, still carefully carved, but silent. Picture them as they were when actively used, read aloud during ceremonies, consulted for important decisions, treasured as embodiments of cultural knowledge. Picture the scribes who created them, proud of their skills, not knowing their work would outlast the ability to understand it. The Rongorongo tablets are monuments to lost knowledge, to the fragility of cultural transmission, to how much of human history and achievement disappears without trace. They exist, undeniable physical objects, but their voices are stilled, their messages unread, their purposes only vaguely guessed at. They remind us that preservation of objects isn't enough. We must also preserve knowledge, context, understanding. Without those, even perfectly preserved artifacts remain mute, holding secrets they can no longer share. The plain of jars, scattered stone vessels. In the mountains of Laos, spread across dozens of sites covering hundreds of square kilometres, are thousands of large stone jars. These aren't small vessels, but massive containers carved from solid rock, ranging from about 1 metre to 3 metres tall and weighing up to several tons. They sit in clusters on hilltops and slopes, some upright, others toppled, weathered by centuries but still clearly artificial. They date to between 500 BCE and 500 CE, created by an ancient culture that left no written records and few other traces. Their purpose remains unknown despite decades of archaeological investigation. The Plain of Jars, as the region is called, contains at least 90 known jar sites. The largest, Site 1, has about 400 jars spread across a hillside. Each site contains anywhere from a few jars to hundreds. The total number of jars across all sites is in the thousands, representing an enormous investment of labour. Each jar was carved from solid stone, sandstone, granite or limestone, using tools that were probably iron chisels and hammers. Creating a single large jar might have taken months of work. The jars are roughly cylindrical, though crude. They're not precisely shaped, but show tool marks and irregularities. Some have lids, heavy stone discs that could be placed over the jar's opening. The lids are found nearby rather than on the jars, having fallen or been removed over the centuries. Inside the jars, archaeologists have found almost nothing. A few beads, some ceramics, charred bone fragments, but nothing that clearly indicates the jar's original use. Various theories have been proposed. The most common is that they were funerary urns, used for exposure of bodies or for storing cremated remains. Some jars contained bone fragments that might be human, though analysis has been inconclusive. The jar sites are often near ridges or hilltops, which some cultures use as burial grounds. The effort invested in creating the jars would be consistent with funerary purposes, honouring the dead by creating permanent markers or containers. But there are problems with the funerary theory. Most jars are empty, with no clear signs of having ever contained human remains. If they were for burials, why are so many completely empty? Why would a culture invest so much effort in creating thousands of stone urns and then not use them? Perhaps the remains have decomposed or been removed, but the lack of consistent evidence inside the jars is puzzling. Another theory proposes the jars were used for food storage, particularly for fermenting rice wine or storing grain. Some Southeast Asian cultures use large ceramic jars for these purposes. Stone jars could serve similar functions, with stone being more durable than ceramic. The jars' locations on hilltops might relate to trade routes or seasonal camps where food storage was important. But again, problems arise. Why create jars from solid stone when ceramic jars would be much easier to make and transport? Why place them in exposed locations rather than near settlements where stored food would be readily accessible? Why make them in such a range of sizes if they're for standardized storage purposes? A third theory suggests the jars were used in ritual or ceremonial contexts, perhaps for collecting rainwater used in religious ceremonies, or for communal feasting associated with ancestor worship, or for purposes we can't imagine without understanding the culture that created them. The jars might have served multiple functions over the centuries they were used, with purposes changing as cultures and practices evolved. The culture that created the jars is mostly unknown. No cities or substantial settlements have been found associated with the jar sites. No elaborate artifacts or monuments besides the jars themselves. The people who created them appear to have been relatively small-scale societies, perhaps chiefdoms or tribal groups, without the urban complexity of civilizations elsewhere in Southeast Asia at the same time, but they had organisation and purpose sufficient to create thousands of stone jars over a wide area spanning centuries. This suggests sustained cultural traditions, specialised stoneworkers, and social structures that could organise and sustain major projects. The jars are evidence of capability and intention, even if we can't fully understand the specific intentions involved. The Plain of Jars region has been heavily affected by conflict. During the Vietnam War and subsequent Laotian civil conflicts, the area was bombed extensively. Unexploded ordnance still litters the landscape, making archaeological survey dangerous. Many jar sites are in areas too dangerous to access safely. This has severely limited research. Sites that should be thoroughly excavated and analysed remain understudied because it's too risky to work there. Some jars have been damaged or destroyed by bombs or by people searching for scrap metal. The war's impact on archaeological sites across Indochina is incalculable. Countless artefacts and structures were destroyed, and vast areas that might contain important archaeological information remain inaccessible or insufficiently studied due to continued hazards from unexploded ordnance. Recent archaeological work has provided some new information. Excavations at several sites have found burial pits near the jars containing human remains and grave goods. This supports the funerary interpretation, though it doesn't definitively prove the jars themselves were used for burials. The jars and the burial pits might both be part of broader mortuary complexes without the jars directly containing bodies. Analysis of stone sources has shown that the jars were made from local rock outcroppings. Quarry sites have been identified where partially completed jars still sit, abandoned mid-creation. These quarries show how the jars were made. Rough forms were carved at the quarry, then transported to their final locations where finishing work was done. But why some jars were abandoned at the quarries is unclear. Were they flawed? Was the project ended for some reason? Did the culture that created them decline or change before completing all intended jars? Imagine yourself in ancient Laos perhaps 2,000 years ago, part of the culture that created these jars. You're involved in a major communal project, carving a new jar at the quarry site. Dozens of workers labour together, chipping away at solid stone, slowly shaping a rough cylinder from the bedrock. The work is hard, progress slow. Days stretch into weeks and months as the jar gradually takes form. Finally, the jar is freed from the bedrock. Now it must be transported, several kilometres uphill to the site where it will stand. You and your community organise for the move, preparing log rollers, clearing a path, gathering enough workers to shift the massive weight. It takes days to move the jar, inching it forward, constantly adjusting and maintaining the rollers and ropes. At last, it reaches its destination and is positioned with the other jars. Your community holds a ceremony dedicating the jar to whatever purpose it serves, honouring ancestors, storing sacred substances, marking territory, or functions that made sense to you but would be mysterious to archaeologists millennia later. The jar will outlast you and your children and countless generations to come, standing silent on that hillside long after your culture has been forgotten. As sleep approaches, as consciousness fades toward dreams, picture those jars as they stand today, scattered across Laotian hillsides, partially excavated by archaeologists, threatened by unexploded ordnance, slowly weathering but still impressive. Picture them as they were when new, perhaps arranged in meaningful patterns now obscured by toppling and displacement, perhaps used in ceremonies whose nature we can only guess at, certainly important enough to justify enormous labour, but mysterious in their specific significance. The Plain of Jars represents archaeological mystery in its purest form, artefacts that clearly required substantial effort and had important purposes, but whose purposes we cannot definitively determine. They're not alone. Across the world, ancient sites and artefacts exist whose significance remains opaque, whose creation required capability we respect even as we struggle to understand the intentions behind that capability. The jars stand as monuments to lost knowledge, to cultures that passed without leaving full records, to human achievement whose meanings have dissolved into time, leaving only stone vessels scattered across hilltops, silent and enigmatic, waiting for insights that may never come or that may emerge unexpectedly from future research, conducted in a region finally at peace and accessible to thorough archaeological investigation. The magnetic anomaly of Oregon, the Oregon vortex. In Gold Hill, Oregon, at a former mining camp now called the House of Mystery, visitors experience phenomena that seem to defy physics. Objects appear to roll uphill. People standing on level ground seem to change height relative to each other, depending on where they stand. Plumb lines hang at odd angles. Compasses spin erratically. The site claims to be a vortex, a place where gravitational or magnetic forces behave unusually, creating effects that science supposedly cannot explain. The Oregon vortex is not ancient. The tourist attraction dates to the 1930s, built around an old mining office that had partially collapsed and stood at an odd angle. But it's included here because it represents a modern attempt to create archaeological mystery, to manufacture phenomena that will puzzle visitors, to present natural effects as inexplicable. Understanding the Oregon vortex helps us understand how mystery can be created, perceived and maintained even when rational explanations exist. The phenomena observed at the Oregon vortex are real, in the sense that visitors genuinely perceive them. But they're not paranormal or scientifically inexplicable. They're the results of clever design, optical illusions and psychological effects. The tilted building and carefully constructed environment create perceptual confusions that the brain interprets as gravitational anomalies or height changes. For example, the apparent height changes are created by standing people on surfaces that are actually tilted but are perceived as level because surrounding visual cues have been manipulated. Your brain judges vertical and horizontal based on context: walls, floors, the horizon. If those references are subtly off, your perception of level changes. Two people standing on a tilted surface will appear different heights, even though they're actually the same distance from a truly level reference. The objects rolling uphill are on surfaces that appear to slope one direction but actually slope the other. Again, contextual cues have been manipulated so your brain misinterprets which way is uphill. The objects are actually rolling downhill, just not in the direction you expect based on the visual framing. The compass disturbances might have multiple explanations: local concentrations of magnetic minerals in the ground, iron objects deliberately placed to affect compass needles, or simply the normal variations in Earth's magnetic field that occur everywhere, but are interpreted as anomalous because you're primed to expect weirdness. None of this is paranormal. It's skilled showmanship based on understanding human perception. Our brains construct our experience of reality from sensory input plus expectations and context. When context is manipulated, perception can be manipulated. The Oregon vortex exploits this, creating experiences that feel mysterious while actually being well understood effects of perceptual psychology. So why include this in a survey of archaeological mysteries? Because it teaches important lessons about mystery itself. First, it shows how easily mystery can be created, with relatively simple manipulations of environment and context. Ordinary phenomena can be made to seem extraordinary. This should make us cautious about claims of inexplicable phenomena. We should ask whether we're being misdirected, whether contextual information is being withheld or manipulated. Second, it shows how perception and expectation shape experience. When visitors come to the Oregon vortex expecting mystery, they perceive mystery. Their brains interpret ambiguous sensory input in ways consistent with expectations. This happens with ancient sites too. When we approach archaeological mysteries expecting the inexplicable, we may interpret ambiguous evidence more mysteriously than warranted. Third, it demonstrates that scientific explanation doesn't diminish wonder. Understanding how the Oregon vortex creates its effects doesn't make the experience less interesting. If anything, appreciating the clever design and perceptual psychology involved enhances appreciation. Similarly, explaining how ancient monuments were built doesn't diminish their impressiveness. It increases respect for the builder's skill and determination. The Oregon vortex has spawned imitators. Similar mystery spots and gravity hills exist around the world, all exploiting the same perceptual effects. The formula is consistent: a tilted environment, manipulated context, priming visitors to expect anomalies, and allowing natural human perceptual quirks to create experiences that feel paranormal but aren't. Some visitors to these sites refuse to accept mundane explanations. They've experienced something that felt inexplicable, and they're emotionally invested in maintaining the mystery. Accepting that they were fooled by visual illusions might feel like admitting gullibility. This resistance to explanation also occurs with ancient mysteries. Once people have embraced mysterious explanations for archaeological puzzles, they may resist more prosaic answers even when evidence supports them. But embracing scientific explanation doesn't mean rejecting wonder or reducing everything to boring mechanism. The ancient monuments we've examined throughout this journey are genuinely impressive, their construction genuinely challenging, their purposes genuinely uncertain in many cases. The mysteries are real even if some proposed explanations, ancient aliens, lost super technologies, are not. The Oregon Vortex reminds us to distinguish between genuine archaeological mysteries and manufactured ones, between phenomena that truly challenge our understanding and phenomena that simply exploit perceptual quirks or gaps in our knowledge. Ancient sites like Baalbek or Göbekli Tepe present genuine puzzles. We know they were built by ancient humans, but the specifics of construction methods and the details of their cultural significance remain incompletely understood. These are worth studying, worth pondering, worth maintaining intellectual humility about. Manufactured mysteries like the Oregon Vortex, or unfounded claims about ancient sites, that the pyramids were built by aliens, that megaliths required lost technologies, are different. They create false mysteries where none exist, or they exaggerate genuine uncertainties into impossibilities. They're less interested in understanding than in maintaining mystery for its own sake or for commercial purposes. As you lie here in the deep peace of approaching sleep, consider how this journey has taken you through genuine mysteries and how it ends with reflection on manufactured mystery. The ancient sites and artifacts we've examined, from Baalbek's impossible stones to Easter Island's unread tablets, from submerged structures to unexplained tunnels, these present real puzzles. We don't have complete answers, but we have frameworks for approaching them. Careful excavation, systematic analysis, testing hypotheses against evidence, maintaining skepticism about extraordinary claims while remaining open to revision of our understanding. The Oregon Vortex, by contrast, presents false mystery, phenomena that seem inexplicable but have straightforward explanations once you understand the tricks being employed. It's entertainment, not archaeology. It's clever showmanship, not genuine puzzle. Distinguishing between these categories, between mysteries worth pondering and mysteries manufactured for effect, is crucial for thinking clearly about ancient enigmas. True mystery doesn't require exaggeration or misdirection. The real capabilities of ancient peoples, the real sophistication of pre-industrial cultures, the real achievements preserved in stone and earth across the world, these are impressive enough without embellishment. Ancient humans were not simple. They were like us, intelligent, creative, capable of remarkable feats when motivated. They left genuine mysteries not because they had supernatural help, but because they achieved things we haven't fully understood, using methods we haven't completely reconstructed, for purposes that made sense in their cultural context, but that we can't fully recover from fragmentary evidence. The journey through archaeological mysteries should leave us with humility, wonder, and respect. Humility about how much we don't know about our past, wonder at what ancient peoples achieved, respect for their capabilities and the knowledge they developed without benefit of modern technology. These are sufficient reasons to study ancient mysteries without needing to invoke impossible explanations or manufactured enigmas. As sleep finally claims you, let the genuine mysteries rest in your mind. The stones too massive to move, the scripts no one can read, the monuments built before cities existed, the purposes we cannot fathom. Let them remain mysterious, uncertain, open to future discovery and interpretation. Let them remind you that human history is deeper, stranger, more complex than simple narratives suggest. And let them inspire curiosity about what else might be discovered, what other mysteries might emerge from ground still unexcavated, from seas still unexplored, from evidence still waiting to reveal stories we don't yet know how to read. The silence and the questions. We have journeyed together through 20 chapters of mystery, through sites and artifacts that resist easy explanation, through achievements that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. From Lebanon to Laos, from Peru to the Pacific, from monuments weighing thousands of tons to tablets covered in unreadable script, we have encountered the enigmatic remains of cultures that preceded us, that left traces we can see, but meanings we cannot fully recover. What have we learned? Not answers. Mysteries by their nature don't offer clean solutions. But we've learned what questions to ask, what evidence exists, what interpretations are possible. We've learned that ancient peoples were sophisticated, capable, and purposeful, even when their purposes remain opaque to us. We've learned that the archaeological record is fragmentary, that much has been lost, that our confident narratives about human history rest on incomplete foundations. We've seen stones moved and placed with precision we struggle to match, at Baalbek, at Sacsayhuaman, in countless megalithic sites worldwide. We don't know exactly how ancient peoples accomplished these feats. We can propose methods, can demonstrate that it's possible with simple tools and massive labour. But gaps remain between our theoretical reconstructions and the actual achievements. The stones stand, silent testimony to capabilities we respect without fully understanding. We've encountered ancient technology that shouldn't exist according to our timelines. The Antikythera mechanism with its sophisticated gearing, appearing suddenly in history without apparent precedent or successor. It forces us to acknowledge that ancient technology was more advanced, at least in some domains, than we usually credit. It reminds us that technological development isn't linear, that capabilities can be lost as well as gained, that civilizations can decline and lose knowledge their ancestors possessed. We've examined sites that challenge conventional chronologies. Göbekli Tepe, built before agriculture supposedly made such projects possible, claimed submerged cities that would date to periods before urban civilization supposedly existed. These sites, whether ultimately confirmed or debunked, force us to question our assumptions, to acknowledge that our understanding of when various human capabilities emerged might be incomplete or incorrect. We've pondered purposes we cannot fathom. Why create perfect stone spheres in Costa Rica? Why carve enormous jars and scatter them across Laotian hillsides? Why build long caves only to abandon them? Why invest enormous effort in projects whose functions remain mysterious? Ancient peoples had reasons that made sense to them, but we cannot fully reconstruct those reasons from material remains alone. We've encountered scripts and symbols we cannot read. The Voynich manuscript, Rongorongo, the carvings at Barnenez. These tantalizing hints of ancient communication remain locked, their messages undelivered across the centuries. They remind us that knowledge transmission is fragile, that when oral traditions die and written records aren't preserved, information is lost, sometimes irretrievably. We've seen how mystery persists despite study. The Piri Reis map with its disputed Antarctic coastline, the Yonaguni monument with its ambiguous features, the European tunnels with their unclear purposes. Despite decades of research, despite modern analytical tools, these mysteries remain unresolved. Different experts examine the same evidence and reach different conclusions. This should teach us humility about archaeological interpretation. The past doesn't always yield clear answers, even to careful inquiry. We've also learned to distinguish genuine mysteries from manufactured ones, to recognize how mystery can be created through misinterpretation or deliberate deception. The Oregon Vortex reminds us that not all claimed mysteries are genuine, that critical thinking and understanding of perceptual psychology helps separate real puzzles from fake ones. What should we do with archaeological mysteries? First, acknowledge them honestly. Don't pretend we have answers when we don't. Don't force evidence into narratives that don't fit. Be comfortable saying we don't know when that's the honest answer. Second, continue studying them seriously. Use every available tool, excavation analysis, experimentation, computer modelling, to understand what can be understood. But maintain appropriate skepticism about extraordinary claims. Require evidence proportional to the remarkableness of hypotheses. Third, avoid the temptation of easy but unfounded answers. Ancient aliens, lost super-civilizations, paranormal explanations. These provide satisfying narrative closure, but usually aren't supported by evidence. Ancient humans were capable of remarkable achievements without supernatural or extraterrestrial help. Respecting their capabilities means not attributing their works to outside forces. Fourth, remain open to revision. New discoveries may change our understanding. Techniques unavailable to past researchers, DNA analysis, satellite imagery, advanced dating methods, continue to reveal new information. Our current interpretations are provisional, subject to revision as new evidence emerges. This is scientific humility, acknowledging that knowledge progresses through accumulation of evidence and willingness to change conclusions when evidence demands it. Fifth, appreciate the mystery itself. Not every puzzle needs solving. Some of the wonder of ancient sites lies precisely in their enigmatic nature. Understanding how they were built doesn't diminish their impressiveness. If anything, it increases respect for the builders. But acknowledging what we don't know, what may never be known, adds depth to our engagement with the past. The monuments endure, the artifacts remain, the mysteries persist, and perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps complete understanding would actually diminish something, would reduce the profound complexity of ancient cultures to simple explanations that don't capture their full reality. The mysteries remind us that the past is foreign country, that ancient peoples thought differently, valued different things, had purposes and priorities we can only partially reconstruct. As you rest here in the final moments before sleep, let these mysteries settle in your consciousness, not as frustrations, but as invitations. Invitations to wonder, to curiosity, to imagination tempered by evidence, to respect for ancient achievement. The stones at Baalbek, the gears of Antikythera, the structures at Göbekli Tepe, the heads of the Olmec, all the enigmas we've encountered, they invite us into engagement with human history in its complexity, its depth, its resistance to simple narratives. They remind us that our ancestors were not primitive. They were humans like us, intelligent, creative, capable of achievements that still impress us millennia later. They developed technologies, created monuments, established traditions, accumulated knowledge. Much of what they knew has been lost. Much of what they built has been destroyed. Much of what survives resists our complete understanding. But it survives nonetheless, testament to human capability across the vast stretches of time. The greatest mystery, perhaps, is not any single artifact or site, but the question of human potential itself. What can humans achieve when motivated by cultural values, religious devotion, political ambition, or simply the drive to create something that endures? The answer, written across the landscape in stones too heavy to move, in monuments built before cities existed, in technologies that wouldn't be matched for centuries, is more than we usually imagine. Sleep now. Dream perhaps of those ancient builders, those unknown engineers and craftsmen and priests and rulers who created works that outlasted their names, their languages, their civilizations. Dream of stones being moved, of tablets being carved, of monuments rising on distant horizons. Dream of purposes we cannot fathom, of knowledge we cannot recover, of mysteries that may never be solved. And when you wake, remember that the world contains more questions than answers, that human history extends far deeper than most narratives acknowledge, that ancient peoples achieved remarkable things we're still trying to understand. Remember that mystery is not weakness, but invitation. Invitation to study, to wonder, to appreciate, to maintain humility before the vast complexity of human history and the limits of what even dedicated investigation can recover from fragmentary evidence. The mysteries remain. They've waited thousands of years. They can wait longer, and we, their distant inheritors, can contemplate them with wonder, respect, and the knowledge that some questions may never have definitive answers, that some achievements may never be fully explained, that some voices from the past speak in languages we will never completely translate. The silence of stones is profound, but it's not empty. It's full of questions, full of hints, full of achievements we can admire even when we cannot completely understand. That's sufficient. That's what archaeology offers. Not always answers, but always engagement with human history in all its mysterious complexity. Rest now, and let the mysteries rest too, waiting in their ancient places for the next person who will stand before them and wonder.